Hello and welcome to the Nauticast podcast, the one true chapter by chapter podcast going through A Song of Ice and Fire, one chapter a week. I'm one of your hosts, Jeff, better known as Brenda B. Fish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 140th episode of the Nauticast titled Inferno, Part 2, an analysis of A Clash of Kings Davos III, in which Davos Seaworth and the Baratheon fleet sail into Blackwater Rush and defeat the Lancer fleet. Nothing else happens. Okay, this is going to be a pretty kind of short chapter, right? I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that sounds quite boring, Jeff. I seem to recall something different happening in season 2 of the show on which these books were based. The show came first and then they wrote the books.
Right, true.
I've been drinking too much. I can't possibly remember what happened. Take it away, sir.
I mean, the show just ruined the books here. I mean, that's what happened here is that, again, it was the apocalypse occurred and Game of Thrones ruined A Song of Ice and Fire, or A Song of Ice and Fire ruined Game of Thrones, whatever it is that actually
Someone
happened.
Ruined something and we are very unhappy about it. Good, we set the tone.
All right, we're going to be very unhappy with Tyrion of House Lannister here.
There we go.
As always, this episode is brought to you by our Not a Small Council, our Hand of the King, Wolfman Zach, Grand Maester Tim Bob, Troubleshooter of Systems, the Designer of Circuit Boards, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Mark N., Lord Travis, Master of Ships and War of the Waves, Captain of the War Galley, Nightwolf, the ship that stalks the seven seas, and wielder of the Valyrian Steel Trident Summoner, the blade that brings the deep ones. Sir Keith J., Master of Whisperers, Lord Philip the Merciful, Master of Laws, Archmaester June, Heal of the Lesser Poxes, Ragged Michael, War of the North, Nelson Hammer, Prince of Dragonscombe, Scarlet the Other Woman, Mistress of Whisperers, Lord Micah, the Quilt Lion, War of the West, Herald the Golden Tooth, Master of the Banefort, and the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the Gem that was promised, the High Bearded Priest, Lord Jake Assistant to the Hand of the King, Lady Zine of Valyrian, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dana, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B., Sir Jasper the Cruel, the King's Justice, Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Kelly, War of the East Mistress of Old Bay of Crabs, Stephen the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Anonymous, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, the Priest of the Drowned God, the King's Cook, Noli Oli, Master of Cannoli, Sir Sorsadelica, Low Energy Gent, True Master of the Banefort, and True Master of Coin, Lord Penchant for Nostalgia, Queer Alex, Beyonce's favorite stand, Ambassador of Chromatica, Rainbow Commander of the Ladies, and Gentle Dems, Haldover, the Waiter for T-Well, A.A. Ron, Dampere, Prophet of the Forsaken, and High Priest of Euron Crowseye, Lieutenant Glenn, Lord of H-Town, Veneris of House Colgarian, the first of her name, Princess of Dragonstone, Mistress of Art, the Avoric, Queen of the Pencils, the Eraser in the First Draft, Queen of Monochrome, Devotee, the Great Game of Thrones, Portraits of the Realm, Lady Realist of the Seven Kingdoms, Blood and Paints, and Maker of Drawings, and the Michelangelo of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Lord Adam T., Lady Alexander of Tarth, Sir Christoph Logus, Bloody Scorpio of the Redfield, Defender of the Letter of Kin, and the Wolverine of House Corgoyle, Lady Elizabeth, Mistress of Horse, Face, Lesbians, Sir Josh Snow, Bastard Bounty Hunter of the North, Surveyor, Chief of Parties in the Frozen Wastes, Lord Peter, Lady Ashley, the Dead Shepherd Reborn, Preacher of the Poor Fellows, Marshal Harrison, absent shipwrecked in the Jade Sea, Grave Rob Stark, the Cadaver King, and Horror of Harrenhal, Olaf, proponent of establishing a feudal, pseudo-democratic system of great councils wherein every count votes. Sir Tim, the knight who is guided by voices. Lord Nick, Thucydides, Lord of Plagues. Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dana, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club. Lord Jean, the Splendid, Master of Coin, Warden of Tampa Bay. Lady Anna, the Lovely Castellan. Pat Ironwood, the Blood Royal and Guardian of the Bone Way. Lord Charles Tyrell of Highgarden. Lord Paramount of the Mander, Defender of the Marches, High Marshal of the Reach, War of the South, and the heir of House Tyrell. Luke, Lord of Lone Leaf and the Pillar of Autumn, Squid Pro Quo, Master of Zorse, Joe Snow, King of the Metro North and Protector of the Tri-State, Hedrigal, Captain of the Airship Arrogance, Squire Matt as Future Matt as the one who will bring balance to the kingdoms, B-Word, Queen Beyond the Wall, Lord Kyle, Lord Samuel Seaworth, Sir Max, Lord Commander of the Constitutional Guard, Blackberry the Bold, Champion of Feel Good Times. Got your name right. Oh, got it. Lady Ivory Dane, aspiring noble author of the Seven Kingdoms, Lady of Starfall, Wardens of the South, and the patron of free-wheeling bisexuals. Thank you to all of our counselors for all of your support.
Thank you to our counselors, as always.
And our spoiler warning, as we say in every episode, we'll potentially talk about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 Dunking Novellas, histories, interviews, the Wins Winners sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones, the TV show. Anything and everything.
Our question this week comes from our Hand of the King, Wolfman Zach, who asks, if Lightbringer is demonstrably a false sword, then how do we think that portion of the prophecy manifests in the actual story? Some wildfire or dragonfire on it or magic involved, or does it not even show up? So what do you think about that, Jeff? Obviously, Stannis' Lightbringer is fake. Pretty much everything from Aemon to, common sense tells us that. But do you think that Lightbringer is going to be realized in a more kind of dramatic, literal form in the story, even if George doesn't underline it directly?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think it brings to mind this kind of distinction that George has between like literally fulfilling prophecies and not literally fulfilling prophecies. George does a really good job of doing this really well in the narrative, and I think here Lightbringer, if it is a sword, which I don't think it is, but I tend to favor something like maybe Longclaw, maybe Dawn, maybe something else like the two swords that came off of Ned's ice. I just don't think that a sword having being like a very direct fulfillment of something prophetic is really all that interesting. To me, rather, I think it's more metaphorical. I think that Lightbringer as a substance or thing is either Danny's dragons, which I tend to favor the strongest, or is the Night's Watch, because part of their vows talk about them being, being light bringers, so to speak, light in the dawn and the darkness, so to speak. So I tend to favor the more metaphorical approach to that. I do think that a lot of the time that when we're looking at these prophecies, just to circle back, I think that George wants us to be, I don't know the right word is. He wants us to be like a little bit smart. Like he doesn't want to just like feed us the answer. He wants to, he wants the reader to, he trusts the reader enough to be like, okay, guys, like, so I'm not really fulfilling all of these prophecies in a way that is very literal. So therefore you should think that probably the answer to these things is going to be much more metaphorical. And I think that tends to be my take on Lightbringer as a thing. I don't know. I think it being a sword would be kind of a super big letdown. It wouldn't be that interesting. It really would not be that interesting if Dawn was Lightbringer. Would it? I just can't imagine like that. George's like, oh, Dawn, the sword that Arthur Dane had, that's Lightbringer. And you're like, ooh, so cool. Yeah, fucking love lore. Anyways, I've been rambling too much, sir. What do you think? What is Lightbringer? Who is Lightbringer?
Yeah, I agree, specifically about the Dawn angle. The Danes, while I think there are certainly a lot of fascinating stuff to go on in the backstory there, I think they are, for the most part, a road not taken in terms of where George was going with the backstory. And they get, in terms of anything except R + L = J, they tend to get less and less important as you go through the series. And I think that's because the Danes, to me, in part feel like the kind of, that version of the story where Dawn would literally be Lightbringer. And I think George has slightly moved away from that. And I think you even see that with like Beric Dondarrion. Like he has a literal fire sword and he literally comes back from the dead. And now he's gone. So that's it. And I think George was kind of, and I love Beric. He's one of my favorite characters. I don't think he's there just to be a joke. But I think George was saying in part, like, yeah, here's actual Azor Ahai fitting literally everything Melisandre's talking about. And he is a tertiary character who ultimately passes on, his fire to Lady Stoneheart. And our main characters are going to engage with it in a much more complicated way. And yeah, I think, the dragons, I think, come closest to anything, directly being Lightbringer. But I don't think there's going to be I don't think it's not like, Aragorn getting the Isildur's sword reforged. It's not there's anything wrong with that, but I think George is very specifically trying to not do that. And yeah, I agree. I think he's whatever he does with it, I think it's going to not be literal. But I think, the dragons showing up in some engagement in the north, as they did in season 7 of the show. I think there will be like large, spectacular set pieces that will suggest Lightbringer to us. And we will go, oh, that feels like Lightbringer. And I think that's what we're supposed to do.
I think it's a great point because, like, it's not going to be like, and it's not going to be like Jon. It's going to be from a Jon chapter. Jon Snow turned to Sansa. It's like, all along, Longclaw was Lightbringer. Like, woo! No, this is really not going to be what's going to happen with the Song of Ice and Fire. So it's I like your idea better that the reader is going to be taking on the role of assuming what is Lightbringer, which is great. Can't wait.
So thank you so much, Wolfman Zach, for the question. If you'd like to ask us questions, we answer here on the Nauticast podcast. You are welcome to become a Sworn Sword or higher level patron over at patreon.com/NauticastASOIAF, where you can become a patron and get show notes, bonus episodes like our recent episode on the Game of Thrones episode, Blackwater, merch, access to the Nauta Slack, and more.
Yes, absolutely. It was so much fun doing that Blackwater episode. Hope you all have enjoyed that. It's out for everyone now, so go ahead and take a listen to it on our regular feed. But enough about Patreon. When we last checked in with Davos, he had sailed on King's Landing, doubting the plan and his fleet commander. Let's see how Davos is proven correct in just about everything in this synopsis of A Clash of Kings, Davos III, Part 2. Davos looks ahead and sees galleys coming towards him, and he knows these ships from when he was a smuggler. The war horns sound again, and Davos orders battle speed. Drums pound, and Davos glances over at Swordfish, where Sundale gives him a salute. Meanwhile, Swordfish continues lagging behind as the river widens into the bay with the Red Keep overlooking all. They would have to pass the castle to get to the harbor and then the city. But now the Lancers beat a retreat as the front line of the Navy crosses into the river. Davos thinks the Lancers are trying to mitigate their numerical disadvantage by constraining them in the river and then locking them in the river with the chain. But Davos starts to notice peculiarities, let's call them. Some of Joffrey's ships were out there, but there were more, like the Lady Lyanna, that were not. They should have been out here, right? Trying to defend King's Landing? Davos tasted a trap, yet he saw no sign of any foes sweeping in behind them. Only the great fleet of Stannis Baratheon and their ordered ranks stretching back to the watery horizon. Will he raise the chain and cut us in two? He could not see what good that would serve. The ships left out in the bay could still land men north of the city. A slower crossing, but safer. Yeah, Davos, there's a lot of clues that something is very, very amiss. But then Davos sees pots of burning pitch flying at them. Most pots hit the water, but 3 pots hit the deck of the ship Dragon's Bane. And then there was another volley of arrows. One man jumps into the water and sinks to the bottom. The first KIA of the day, but not the last, Davos thinks. Meanwhile, Joffrey's banners stream, crown stag on Goldfield, along with the Lion of Lannister in crimson. Burning pitch explodes. The ship Courageous catches on fire and burns the men-at-arms on deck. Davos knows he's coming into enemy artillery range now as the ship pushes on. Davos' second line passes between the towers with the chain still beneath them. Mathos Seaworth hands his dad a helmet just before pots of burning pitch rain down all around them. War horns continue to sound, and Davos sees the first line of ships are exchanging arrow fire with the men on the walls. South of the Blackwater, Davos saw men dragging crude rafts toward the water, while ranks and columns formed up beneath 1,000 streaming banners. The fiery heart was everywhere, though the tiny black stag imprisoned in flames was too small to make out. We should be flying the crowned stag, Davos thought. The stag was King Robert's sigil. The city will rejoice to see it. This stranger standard serves only to set men against us. He could not behold the fiery heart without thinking of the shadow Melisandre had birthed in the gloom beneath Storm's End. And at least we fight this battle in the light with the weapons of honest men, he told himself. The Red Woman and her children would have no part of it. Stannis had shipped her back to Dragonstone with his bastard nephew Eddard Storm. His captains and bannermen had insisted that a battlefield was no place for a woman. Only the Queensmen had dissented, and then not loudly. All the same, the king had been on the point of refusing them until Lord Bryce Caron said, "Your Grace, if the sorceress is with us, afterward men will say it was her victory, not yours. They will say you owe her your crown. They will say you owe her, one more time. They will say you owe your crown to her spells." That had turned the tide. Davos himself had held his tongue during the arguments, but if truth be told, he had not been sad to see the back of her. He wanted no part of Melisandre or her god. The first of Stannis' ships, Devotion, hits the shore and loads archers as they move to shore, holding their bows above their heads to keep their strings dry. And then Prayer and Piety hit the shores too. And then the knights fall upon the men, forcing them back to the ships and into the arrows. Davos sees that one of the Lannister knights is none other than Sandor Clegane as he rides up onto Piety, onto Prayer, cutting down anyone around him. Davos looks out and sees the harbor and riverfront are still in burned ruins. He realizes that he can't land there, and he notices trebuchets sitting beyond the mud gate atop Visenya's hill. And then there's the sound. 2 galleys crash into each other, and then two more galleys, then 2 more. One of Joffrey's ships was cleaved in half as Fury's forward catapult thumps. Men fight ship to ship everywhere, and then Davos sees the trebuchets' arms in motion. Ashore, the arms of the great trebuchets rose, 1, 2, 3, and 100 stones climbed high into the yellow sky. Each one was as large as a man's head. When they fell, they sent up a great gouts of water, smashed through oak planking, and turned living men into bone, pulp, and gristle. All along the river, the first line was engaged. Grappling hooks were flung out. Iron rams crashed through wooden hulls. Boarders swarmed. Flights of arrows whispered through each other in the drifting smoke, and men died. But so far, none of his. Black Betha swept upriver and sounded her, and the sound of her oarmaster's drum thundering in her captain's head as he looked for a likely victim for her ram. The beleaguered Queen Alisane was trapped between two Lannister warships, the three made fast by hooks and lines. "Ramming speed!" Davos shouted. The drums start pounding and Black Betha flies into battle. Allard Seaworth brings Lady Marya beside Davos, and they move toward the three ships tangled against one another. Davos prays to the warrior to bring the enemy around broadside, and the warrior grants Davos his prayer as Black Betha and Lady Marya smash into the side of Lady Shane, which is a Lannister ship, obviously. They impact so hard that Davos almost bites his tongue off, and Davos calls himself a fool before realizing that this is the first time that he's ever rammed another ship in his entire career. His archers fire, and then Davos orders Black Betha back as the Lannister ships fall to pieces and men spill into the water, screaming for help as they drown. And then a brand new color arrives in the battle. A flash of green caught Davos's eye, heading off to port, and a nest of writhing emerald serpents rose burning and hissing from the stern of Queen Alisane. Instead later, Davos heard the dread cry of "Wildfire!" He grimaced. Burning pitch was one thing, wildfire quite another. Evil stuff and well nigh unquenchable. Smothered under a cloak, and the cloak took fire. Slap at a fleck of it with your palm, and your hand was aflame. "Piss on wildfire and your cock burns off," old seamen like to say. Still, Sir Emery had warned them to expect the taste of the alchemist's vile substance. Fortunately, there were few true pyromancers left. They will soon run out, Sir Emery had assured them. Davos pulls his ship out, and Allard gets Lady Marya out too as burning wildfire covers Queen Alisane. Men burning with green fire jump into the water, shrieking as spit fires from the walls of King's Landing fire death into the water, and more trebuchet boulders are hurled from Visenya's Hill. One hits the ship, bold laughter destroying it instantly. Through the black smoke and swirling green fire, Davos glimpsed a swarm of small boats bearing downriver, a confusion of ferries and wherries, barges, skiffs, rowboats, and hulks that looked too rotten to float. It stank of desperation. Such driftwood could not turn the tide of a fight, only get in the way. The lines of battle were hopelessly ensnared, he saw. Off to port, Lord Stefan, Ragged Jenna, and the swift sword had broken through and were sweeping upriver. The starboard wing was heavily engaged, however, and the center had shattered out of the stones of those trebuchets, some captains turning downstream, others veering to port. Anything to escape that crushing rain. Fury had swung her aft catapult to fire back at the city, but she lacked the range. The barrels of pitch were shattering under the walls. Scepter had lost most of her oars, and Faithful had been rammed and was starting to list. Davos took Black Betha between them and struck a glancing blow at Queen Cersei's ornate carved and gilded pleasure barge, laden with soldiers instead of sweetmeats now. The collision spilled a dozen of them into the river, where Betha's archers picked them off as they tried to stay afloat. Mathos shouts to Davos that a Lannister galley is coming to ram them, and Davos orders a starboard turn. The Lannister ship only glanced off Black Betha, and Davos orders his men to board the ship. Grappling lines are thrown, and Davos leads the assault himself and meets the crew of the Lannister Whiteheart in battle. Davos and his men-at-arms fight their way across the deck, sweeping Lannister bros off the ships quickly. During the melee, a Lannister guy comes up behind Davos and attempts to swing an axe at him, but it only glances off his helmet, and Davos runs him through with his sword. The Whiteheart now belongs to Davos, and they are the calm within the storm of battle around them. Davos surveys the chaos around, seeing all the ramming, boarding, watching as the true Baratheons take another of Joffrey's ships. He turns back and sees that the entire fleet has entered the river now. Only Salladhor Saan's ships remained outside. Sure enough, they would control the Blackwater. Sir Imry will have his victory, Davos thought, and Stannis will bring his host across. But gods be good, the cost of this. Captain, sir! Mathos touched his shoulder. Whew. Oh man, you just know what's about to happen. I know it, you know it, but I'm going to let George tell it. It was Swordfish, her two banks of oars lifting and falling. She had never brought down her sails, and some burning pitch had caught in her rigging. The flames spread as Davos watched, creeping out over ropes and sails until she trailed ahead of yellow flame. Her ungainly iron ram, fashioned after the likeness of the fish from which she took her name, parted the surface of the river before her. Directly ahead, drifting toward her and swinging around to present a tempting plump target, was one of the Lannister hulks floating low in the water. Slow green blood was leaking out between her boards. When he saw that, Davos Seaworth's heart stopped beating. No, he said. No, no! Above the roar and crash of battle, no one heard him but Mathos. Certainly the captain of the Swordfish did not, intent as he was on finally spearing something with his ungainly fat sword. The Swordfish went to battle speed. Davos lifted his maimed hand to clutch at the leather pouch that held his finger bones. With a grinding, splintering, tearing crash. Swordfish split the rotted hulk asunder. She burst like an overripe fruit, but no fruit had ever screamed that shattering wooden scream. From inside her, Davos saw green gushing from 1,000 broken jars, poison from the entrails of a dying beast, glistening, shining, spreading across the surface of the river. The payoff, I guess, has exploded for a Clash of Kings. Davos orders the ship back, and they cut lines just in time before the explosion hits Black Betha, and the ship disappears as Davos is lifted into the sky. Davos hits the water, spitting it out, sucking in the air, grabbing onto debris, and holding onto it for dear life. Davos watches in horror as more and more of the Baratheon ships go up in a wildfire blaze. The current catches hold of Davos, spinning him around as he tries to avoid the wildfire. He thinks of his sons, but he can't reach them now or find them in the chaos. Another huge ship blows up behind him as the black water seems to boil. I'm being swept out to the bay. It wouldn't be so bad there. He ought to be able to make it to shore. He was a strong swimmer. Salador's sons' galleys would be out in the bay as well. Sir Imri had commanded them to stand off. And then the current turned him about again, and Davos saw what awaited him downstream. The chain. God save us, they've raised the chain. Where the river broadened out into Blackwater Bay, the boom stretched taut, the bear 2 or 3 feet above the water. Already a dozen galleys had crashed into it, and the current was pushing others against them. Almost all were aflame, and the rest would soon be. Davos could make out the striped hulls of Salador San's ships beyond, but he knew he would never reach them. A wall of red-hot steel, blazing wood, and swirling green flames stretched before him. The mouth of the Blackwater Rush had turned into the mouth of hell. And that is a Clash of Kings Davos 3 Part 2. Whoa, baby, Inferno. Yeah, you named this one correctly, sir. Here we are. It has finally happened, and I'm thrilled, just fucking thrilled to be here with you, man, of course, and just thrilled that everyone is listening and watching. And it means a lot to me. So, yeah, what did you make of the second half of this chapter, man?
So imagine a dying star. It's collapsing in on itself, getting denser and hotter until finally it explodes into a supernova. A Clash of Kings is the dying star, and Davos 3 is the supernova. This is the full release of all the tensions we've been tracing throughout the book. Magic, politics, military matters, it all comes together, and then George literally blows it all sky high. It's an incredible set piece in conception, but it wouldn't be nearly as effective without being focused in execution through our POV, Davos Seaworth, who watches his whole life burn up in an instant. Action scenes
action
don't
scenes,
come better
man.
than
Like,
this.
the thing that makes it really good in George's world is how well he times it. The rising and falling action we see of Davos and the Baratheon fleet engaging the Lannisters, the initial wildfire attack, then the initial Baratheon victory that Davos is witnessing. The Baratheons took casualties. They lost ships and men. It was not a flawless victory. And it's in that moment, in that lull of the fighting for Davos Seaworth, that it all explodes. The lull is just as important as the explosion itself. It gives the reader and Davos a breather, but it's that false type of breather. It's the Rohirrim sweeping the field of the orcs besieging Minas Tirith, only for the Haradrim and the Oliphants to show up. But this time, there is no ghost army coming to save the day, I guess in the movies. There's only the Jade Holocaust and one man's faith in his king and cause blown overboard and run up against the Iron Chain.
Perfectly said. That's exactly the tone of this chapter. It's quite a switch. We wanted to handle all the great military build-up matters that you handled so well last week, and then it just gives way in this part of the chapter. So Davos watches as the Lannister fleet approaches, as where we left off last time. He's thinking about how well he knows these ships and their captains. It's not because he's a Navy nerd. It's because back in Davos's smuggler days, he had to know whether that ship chasing him was fast or slow, captained by a young man or an old one. His life depended on it. And that mindset doesn't just vanish because Davos is no longer a smuggler. It's part of him, instinctive, intuitive. His noble-born peers lack this information because they've never needed it the way Davos did. Their lives never depended on their wits. Once more, the fact that Davos had to work for a living has made him more competent than those who didn't. In order to survive, he had to develop useful skills. Their survival was not founded on their individual skills, but inherited wealth and status. It reminds me of that joke from Ghostbusters. I've worked in the private sector. They expect results. Davos leveraged these skills not only to survive, but to carve out a better life for his sons. Yet that dynamic has led the Seaworth men here, following the thoughtless elites to their doom. Their individual skills do not allow them to escape the system around them. As the Baratheon fleet ramps up into battle speed, Davos' sons hold the line, but the ship Swordfish does not. A nice illustration of my argument. The Red Keep looms larger as they all draw closer. As in our introduction to King's Landing back in A Game of Thrones Catelyn 4, George describes the Red Keep as a monster, as if the castle is preparing to feed on blood. This battle is all about who holds that castle, and either way, the castle kind of wins. You know what I mean? The power structure feeds. That imagery adds to the dread Davos is experiencing as he reads the battlefield. The Lannister ships are retreating, drawing the Baratheon ships in. Moreover, many of the best Lannister ships aren't there. Again, Davos only knows this because of his experiences as a smuggler. Imry Florent has no such experience with King's Landing, and thus, as far as we can tell, remains totally oblivious to what's happening. That's not to say Davos' experience saves him, nor his sons. He still doesn't know about the wildfire, so all he can conclude is that the Lannisters mean to use the chain to cut the fleet in two, if only. But George keeps emphasizing how different Davos' worldview is from his noble-born peers, because it will make all the difference in A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons. As the battle proper begins, Davos keeps drawing our attention to individual men and their struggles to stay alive. Davos notes the first man to die, thinking mournfully about how many will follow him. You think Imry Florent is doing the same thing, like sipping some iced wine at the forefront of the fury? Hell no. Davos hears men shriek as arrows find them. He feels a stab of sympathy for the men on the ships even closer to the walls than he is. I think it's difficult to separate Davos' background from his moral consciousness. Now, of course, simply growing up poor doesn't turn you into an angel. But I think Davos empathizes with the common men like this because he is aware what a fluke it is that he became a knight. There but for the grace of God goes I, as the saying goes. And for Davos, King Stannis is his god. Only Stannis has prevented Davos from being one of the nameless, unremembered commoners used as pawns at best. Yet, it is also Stannis and his cause that has put Davos and his family in this situation in the first place. That is the struggle that will become central to Davos' story in A Storm of Swords. How do I both serve my king and do the right thing?
That's such a great dynamic that George plays within A Storm of Swords, and you might not get the impression that George was going to go that direction when you're reading Davos' chapters in A Clash of Kings, and especially this chapter, which is primarily a battle chapter. Because I think like here, it's a very in-between worlds feel for Davos Seaworth as he barrels down upon the Lannister fleet. The sights of the glint of golden sunlight shining off the hulls of the enemy ships, that seems to represent the way Davos sees the endpoint of Stannis' successful conquest of King's Landing. The endpoint, though, is through that fleet into the city, and then Davos' grandsons can joust with the Valarians and Celticars, as you and Davos have both been pointing out so well in these podcast episodes. But Davos also occupies an in-between state in his status as a captain out here on the Blackwater. Davos thinks about safety in the context of whether the enemy ships were fast or slow or commanded by young men eager for glory or old men trying to survive to retirement age. Davos is neither fast nor slow, and his ship is neither fast nor slow either. He's serving in the second line of ships on the advance, and he is also neither young, eager for glory. That was him bringing Saltfish and Onions to Storm's End, I think. Nor especially old either. He's not really in the place where he's about to hang up his spurs. Davos' place in the narrative of A Song of Ice and Fire is always in the middle. Yes, service to Stannis, but not to war. Obedience to Stannis, but not at the cost of his soul, a la Edric Storm.
Perfectly said. Edric Storm, of course, is going to be Edric Storm is going to be Davos' attempt at making serving the king and doing the right thing the same, if that makes sense. Like Edric Storm is Davos' way of like, I'm going to rescue Edric Storm from Stannis, and that's, deliberately disobeying him, but also I'm going to come in with this opportunity to make you the better king you could have been. So that's Davos threading the needle, about which we will have much more to say in A Storm of Swords. So you may have noticed that Davos III has so far completely ignored the batshit crazy ending to Davos II with Melisandre and her shadow baby. I think this is another sign that Davos was not a fully formed protagonist in his own right in George's mind at this point. If one of the original POVs had seen something like that, it is all their next chapter would be about. Davos in A Clash of Kings, however, is more a window onto events than he is the center of the narrative, so he only briefly mentions Melisandre. She only comes up in the context of the banner of the Fiery Heart flying over all their ships. Davos wishes they were flying the Baratheon flag, the crowned stag. He believes that the people would rejoice to see it, and I think he's right, judging from what Jacelyn Bywater told Tyrion after the riot. Your eunuch must have told you, there is small love for the Lannisters in King's Landing. Many still remember how your lord father sacked the city when Aerys opened the gates to him. They whisper that the gods are punishing us for the sins of your house, for your brother's murder of King Aerys, for the butchery of Rhaegar's children, for the execution of Eddard Stark and the savagery of Joffrey's justice. Some talk openly of how much better things were when Robert was king, and hint that times would be better again with Stannis on the throne. In pot shops and wine sinks and brothels, you hear these things. And in the barracks and guard halls as well, I fear. It's easy to forget that Stannis has all the raw materials for a popular campaign. Everyone liked Robert. No one likes the Lannisters. Stannis' accusation that the Lannisters led a coup against Robert carries weight. Stannis is ostensibly fighting for Baratheon restoration. But Davos notes, as at Storm's End, that the stag inside the Fiery Heart is barely visible. All you can see from the walls is the icon of fire, which, as Sansa told us, terrifies the people of King's Landing. It promises another sack. Remember, Stannis never got along with his brothers, both of whom flew the Baratheon crowned stag. So even as Stannis declares himself Robert's heir and goes to war on that basis, his flag demonstrates his resentment of his big brother's legacy. It's an image of that crown on fire. Stannis himself might not believe in R'hllor, but the imagery of the Red God reigns supreme in his campaign, more than the imagery of his own family.
Absolutely. And throughout the narrative of A Song of Ice and Fire, Stannis has an enormous optics problem. And while Stannis' reputation and the lies the Lannisters and Littlefinger push out definitely aid that, let's not fool ourselves. His poor rep is almost entirely of his own making. The banner of the burning stag that Stannis took as his own, that seems to be a reflection of Stannis' belief that he needs to try a red hawk, that seven never saved him. And he's going to make that very, very literal by putting it on as his sigil. And as you know, Stannis also reflected back in Davos 1, he knows that the Red God, that Melisandre has real power that he hopes to attain. And then again, because Stannis has to make it really obvious that he's thinking about what he's thinking, he changes the Baratheon banner to his own type of sigil. Now, as we talked about back in Catelyn's second chapter in A Clash of Kings, Renly has also changed the Baratheon banner, bringing in the golden stag on field of Tyrell green. But the Tyrells are a known quantity, an entity that Westeros is familiar with. What Renly did was within bounds of how to modify sigils in Westeros. Think about Brendan Blackfish's personal sigil. That's well within the bounds. What Stannis does is introduce something strange into the mix, a symbol which tells the residents of King's Landing that they will face the fires if Stannis wins. Now, I've talked before about, and I know you have as well, about why the Red Wedding is so bad. It makes people like Brendan Tully unwilling to surrender peacefully. He has to fight to the death as he knows the promises of the Lannisters and phrase of safe conduct are suspect at best, but definitely bullshit at worst. But consider that the Fiery Heart of R'hllor works similarly in that it overwhelms the small stag, and it works to kind of offset. It kind of spooks the defenders of King's Landing. The Sellswords and Goldcloaks, they don't really love the Lannisters, but if the optics are telling the story that they're going to burn either way, they're going to die in battle rather than die as executed prisoners that Stannis burns. I keep bringing this up about Stannis, but his reputation is one in which he's quote-unquote notoriously without mercy. So the burning stag only aids that reputation, no matter if it's not the hashtag objective truth. And this hurts his cause in the long term. And speaking of that banner, it is a strange banner after all.
Yes, indeed. Davos refers to the Fiery Heart as a stranger's banner. That's what he calls it. And that has multiple meanings. On the surface, Davos is saying that R'hllor is a foreign god to Westeros. The people of King's Landing, by and large, worship the Seven, many of them quite fervently. they're not likely to accept the destruction or diminishment of that faith. But Davos's statement also resonates within the faith of the Seven. The stranger's banner could refer to the stranger, the faith's god of death. Sansa made this explicit in her last chapter. Stannis has become the stranger, a fearsome figure of doom and judgment for King's Landing. The people light a few candles to him, but only out of fear, whereas the Baratheon flag might have inspired positive emotions. Oh, remember when Robert was in charge and we were okay? It looks like that's coming back. Stannis said at Storm's End that he can only rule through fear. Well, okay, this is what he gets. Davos is also reflecting on how Stannis has become a stranger to him. As he thought at Storm's End, what has she done to him? Of course, as we also saw at Storm's End, Stannis is unwilling to consciously face the deal with the devil that he has made. His guilt, grief, and self-loathing is hidden away in his nightmares. So while Davos is glad that Stannis sent Melisandre back to Dragonstone, because it means they'll fight with, quote, the weapons of honest men, if only, that's not why Stannis sent Melisandre away. Stannis was on the verge of keeping the Red Woman with him, and then Bryce Caron warned him that Melisandre might get all the credit for victory, and that's all it took. Davos is the only one to appeal to the better angels of Stannis' nature because he's the only one who cares about such things. Everyone else realizes that the quickest and surest route to getting Stannis' attention is to prick his pride, fan the flames of his resentment. Stannis is happy to make use of Melisandre's powers, but not if that means she becomes the center of attention. Stannis is all too familiar with the sensation of being passed over, of everyone preferring someone else. Stannis only just came into his power. For once, everyone's buzzing around him rather than Robert and Renly. It would be a nightmare for him to take the throne at last, only for everyone to turn around and praise Melisandre for it, just like Robert praised Ned Stark. It would be that all over again. Davos is glad that Melisandre isn't with them, and given what he saw at Storm's End, I can't blame him. But Stannis' reasoning does not speak well of his motivations. Davos thought at Storm's End that Melisandre had transformed Stannis. Crescent thought the same thing. Here we see that this is not quite the case. If Melisandre was really puppeteering Stannis, he never would have sent her back to Dragonstone. He is still in charge, for better or worse. Davos thinks that he kept silent during the argument over Melisandre. Come a storm of swords, he will no longer stay silent.
He cannot stay silent because, again, he still has that beating ethical heart, which almost serves as Stannis' ethical heart for mostly for the better, as we're going to unpack in A Storm of Swords. And it's also just like Stannis, too, to occupy this middle ground, same as I was talking about Davos before. Melisandre returns to Dragonstone, but Stannis is keeping a Melisandre-infused banner with him as they go into battle. And it's not quite accurate to say that it's Melisandre's banner. Of course, she probably influenced the design, but really, it's Stannis's, and he owns it here at the Blackwater for Mostly Ill. Stannis, man, I mean, I know we're like the one true reread podcast, and we're talking about this man so much here, but
of course,
George goes so out of his way to make his appearance in Assault on King's Landing complex when it really doesn't have to be. I mean, you can imagine a scenario where it's Robert Baratheon or someone like Robert Baratheon coming to take the throne back from an illegitimate monarch in the form of Joffrey, some psychopathic little shit. And instead we have Stannis Baratheon, who is a complicated, complex figure, and we're not really sure how to feel about him, at least at this point in A Clash of Kings. And he's only shown up for 4 chapters in Clash, 5 if you count his shadow in Catelyn's 4th chapter. Next week, we're going to be back with Tyrion, and I wonder whether there's a deliberate contrast to Tyrion, who George goes into an enormous amount of detail to demonstrate Tyrion's complexity. With Stannis, he's not even going to show up on page in his most famous in-narrative battle. George seemingly decided on a less is more approach to Stannis in the narrative, and I think it works really, really well. Why? Because as you and Sansa so awesomely pointed out, Stannis is the stranger come to judge those who see the external image. In the eternal version that Davos glimpses is an introvert, desperate for a little peace and quiet. I could just imagine the amount of teeth grinding occurring on the south bank of the Blackwater during this point in the battle with all the noises that are just floating across the water. Regardless, as we were saying in our episode on the Blackwater, on the TV episode rather, the complexity for this battle is in not knowing which side to root for. We know that Stannis' claim to the Iron Throne is the correct one, and yet we've also seen that he's willing to use sorcery to kill people. Is that the person we want to see on the Iron Throne? On the other hand, do we want to see a psychopath in the form of Joffrey Baratheon continue to rule? Even as battle is joined, readers, especially first-time readers, not just those who might wear certain shirts, are still undecided. It's George's perfect encapsulation of gray characters and especially gray causes.
Perfectly said. I think there's a clear need for Joffrey to go, and yet there's this tension of what's going to happen with Stannis and the deal he's making, and also just what's going to happen during the battle itself. Even if, you think everything's going to go fine under Stannis, what about what it takes to get there, which is something we're going to get into later as Davos talks about the battle. And speaking of the battle, after that brief flashback to the argument over Melisandre, Davos drags us back to the present as the fighting ramps up. And once again, I yield military matters to Jeff, who knows much more of what he speaks.
So, yeah, thanks. You remember that time when I kayaked up to the Chesapeake Bay when I was 14 years old at summer camp? Baby, it's time for me to use that vast naval experience and apply it to the Battle of the Blackwater. I'm kidding, obviously. Sort of.
I fell out of a canoe into Lake Michigan once. That's the full extent of my naval experience. So I think you're already a couple of ranks ahead of me, sir.
Well, we had to when we were doing it, we had to do the rollover procedures. What happens if your boat turns over in the shallow waters, and we had to train that sort of stuff too. So I'm right there with you. So
I would have drowned. You're fine.
Yeah, something like that. Probably not. So last time we talked about the planning that went to the battle, and now we're going to see how that awful planning gets executed into the breach. So now we're at the point of the battle where we're no longer looking on the outside in. We are now entering into the Blackwater Rush proper, moving online in a full frontal attack on the Lannister fleet. Now, last 2 weeks ago, I referenced Daniel Sickles and briefly referenced his conduct at the Battle of Gettysburg. As I was kind of rereading this portion of the battle, this really kind of felt like Pickett's charge with the Baratheon fleet occupying the Confederate Army role of moving online in echelon towards the objective. All the while, artillery is raining down on them as they're exposed in open space. Unlike the Battle of Gettysburg, though, the defenders are not holding a static line of defense in hopes of repelling the attackers. Instead, the Lannisters are engaging in, let's call it a modified infantry battle number 3, break contact. Again, I ain't some fucking squid I fought in real wars. Traditional break contact would have one element provide suppressing fire to allow the other elements to kind of echelon move backwards. But this is a modified version. As Davos notes, the Lannisters begin backing water, and he realizes correctly that the Lannisters are hoping to draw the Baratheon fleet farther into the river. But then he notices some notable absences among the Lannister ships, Lady Lyanna, Robert's Hammer, and the Lion Star. Why weren't the jewels in the Lannister fleet on the river? Because cheap bastards that they are, and especially Tyrion is, the Lannisters aren't going to sacrifice their best ships to this trap. That Tyrion doesn't fully commit to the bluff might be a fatal flaw in the planning if someone other than Imry Florent were in command here. Davos's mind starts working. He looks back and checks to see if the rest of the ships he knows were missing or closing in behind him, but they aren't. Okay, so maybe they're hoping to cut the fleet in half of the chain. Okay, but that doesn't make any sense either. So Baratheons could then land ships north of the city. Hey, Davos actually references that was my battle plan from 2 weeks ago. Alas, the chain isn't raised yet. The Baratheon fleet plows forward into the river. The first line comes into artillery range, and they start to get hit with pots of burning pitch shot from the walls. To kind of pause very briefly and talk about those burning pots, I think Martin is likely basing these on historical fire pots. Typically, these are earthen pots which were filled with flammable liquid, set alight, and hurled at opponents, typically at a static structure, location, or a mass of enemy troops assaulting a gate. We would see this primarily, the Mongols were the ones who were really good at using this, but it was also used in Syrian battles in the 12th century as well between the Crusaders and other forces that were fighting out there. The pots would then break open and things would catch on fire, etc., etc. You know where this is going. Here, the pots are fired en masse and moving targets on the water. They aren't very effective in scoring hits, as Davos sees, but when they do hit one of the ships, they do have an impact. The danger is first to the men on the top deck who are all crowded in as part of the landing force, but I don't actually think the primary goal is to kill the men on the decks with the projectiles. Instead, the primary objective here is to hit the sails en masse with the projectiles, slowing the Baratheon ships so that they would have to go to oars against the current of the Blackwater Rush, which again is flowing against the Baratheon fleet coming into the Blackwater Rush from Blackwater Bay. And they're all trying to do this to bunch the Baratheon ships up for the wildfire explosion, which is about to occur. This ends up driving some of the Baratheon ships to start beaching men on the shore. And like I said 2 weeks ago, this is really an excellent bit of innovation on the part of these captains of these ships, because the docks are blown up, they're gone, and it does end up getting men to the north bank of the Blackwater. So 3 ships hit the north shore and start landing men. But then Santa Clegane leads the sally out of, I think it's the Mudgaze where he comes out of. As smart and brave as those captains were in beaching those ships, the problem is that the men coming off of the ships are in the most amount of danger immediately after landing. And Santa Clegane takes full advantage of that, sweeping his cavalry down along the shoreline, killing Baratheon men before they can mass or even form a shield wall to hold against the cavalry. I honestly have forgotten that detail that Santa Clegane rides his horse onto one of the ships, killing his way aboard the ship. It's fucking metal. And given the white cloak he's wearing, he's the Pale Rider, the horseman of the apocalypse bringing death where he rides. So, as Davos sees, few of any of these Baratheon soldiers and sailors survive the initial charge. But as Tyrion notes in the next chapter, 8 ships do make it to the north bank of the Blackwater and do unload trips after Santa Clegane retreats back to the Mudgate. Back out on the water, Davos hears 2 ships ramming each other. What happens next is an intentional mess of confusion that George uses to illustrate what I think he's doing is illustrating the fog of war and how the battle moves from pieces on a map into the actual chaos of battle. But to kind of provide a little bit of clarity about what I think is happening, the first line of ships meets the Lannister line of ships that stopped backwatering and now presses forward now that the Baratheon fleet is entering the Blackwater Rush in mass. Again, the Lannister intent here is not to beat the Baratheons on the water, rather it's to get everyone tangled up in battle. Now, something that is a little bit of a curiosity to me is that I can't imagine that Tyrion told his own Lannister ship captains what he was planning to do here, because that wildfire is going to blow up and burn everything. But I'm pretty curious about what the type of orders were that those guys received. I feel kind of sorry for the Lannisters who Tyrion is just killing one way or another, either by the Baratheon ships that are ramming them or boarding them, or by the wildfire he's about to unleash. A Baratheon ship, Stag of the Sea, rams the Lannister ship, sinking it immediately, while Fury, which is the flagship, which is Imry Florin is on, fires catapult bolts. 2 other Baratheon ships, Dog's Nose and Queen Alysanne, are set afire and locked in hand-to-hand combat with Lannister ships respectively. So they're boarding each other. The Lannisters are boarding Queen Alysanne and fighting on the decks. Then Davos sees a Lannister ship named Kingslander cut between Faithful and Scepter. He orders his archers to fire, and the captain of the Kingslander dies. And then the trebuchets fire. So in my imagination, normally what you would see with trebuchets is that they are normally loaded with large boulders and then just thrown at a large structure or a large mass of troops. But here, Tyrion has the trebuchet levers loaded with head-sized boulders that come down like hail. As Davos notes, there's hundreds of these rocks that are falling down all around them. The point again is, as I keep emphasizing, that the primary use of these boulders is not anti-personnel. A boulder that size flung from that distance with that amount of velocity could come straight down and make a hole in a ship, sinking it or slowing it as the projectile pierces through the decks and hull of the ship, allowing the ships to take on water. But then Davos sees a chance to relieve Queen Alysanne, and he orders Black Betha into ramming speed to ram Lady Shame. Man, these names. Allard sees the chance as well, and Black Betha hits the ship with such a ferocity that Davos almost bites his tongue off. Ow. Davos pulls his ship back, and the Lannister galley falls to pieces in front of him, which must have been quite a horrific sight. And then there's the shout of wildfire. Now, we're going to cover this a bit more later on, but here it seems the initial volley of wildfire was intended to infect the Blackwater Rush with the substance for the future. Kaboom! Davos and Allard pull their ships away from the spreading substance, but it's too late for the Queen Alysanne, which goes up in green flame. Now, I'm going to fast forward the narrative just a bit here because we want to give the wildfire our full, undivided attention to their next section. So, out of the water, after the rows of skiffs and junk boats come at the Baratheon fleet, a Lannister galley attempts to ram Black Betha. Davos pivots hard to the starboard, which prevents Black Betha from getting rammed. Instead, both ships are side by side, and Davos orders the Lannister galley to be boarded. Now, naval boarding is kind of a fascinating historical topic. I talked 2 weeks ago about how the Romans ran legionary tactics on the Mediterranean Sea, especially against the Carthaginians. What I meant by that was that the Romans weren't so much into the naval artillery, ram ships sort of thing. They did boarding. So they would basically go side by side with the ship, and they would jump aboard the other ship in order to take it captive and fight a battle on the decks, just like they were fighting a battle on the land. And this was, again, decisive against the Carthaginians, especially in the First Punic War. Here we see this in practice as Davos orders grappling lines fired at the Lannister galley, and then he leads his men from the front into the Lannister galley, fighting hand to hand. The idea behind boarding is to kill the enemy by stabby stab, or literally push them over the side of the ship into the water. Davos succeeds in taking the Lannister galley, but is almost killed when someone swings an axe at his head. Now, I kind of glossed over this in the summary, but Mathis told him at one point to put a helmet on, and that actually saves his life here, because helmets may be hardly heroic, but they do save lives. So that's basically the rundown of the battle as far as I see it. I will I will note one detail that really stood out to me after the ship-to-ship fighting, and it said Davos is after he's boarded the ship and he's taken the ship. So it says Davos took off his helm, wiped blood from his face, and made his way back to his own ship, trotting carefully on board, slimy with men's guts. Now, I think it's fun to imagine and see Davos as this kind of swashbuckling bro, which the show didn't portray. And I think George wants us to admire his bravery. Still, the horror is there, right? It remains a deck covered in blood and guts, so slippery that you had to like watch where you're stepping. That's a horrific sight and probably an even worse smell. The aftermath of Davos's heroism lingers with me, and I think even as George turns on the pyrotechnics, we're intended not to marvel at the green explosion, but to shrink away as men burn to death, drown to death, or stabbed to death horrifically.
That emotional tenor lingers with you long after the kind of the plot mechanics fade away and the logistics fade away. And I love what you're saying about Sandor coming, kind of riding through that fog as this pale rider, as this symbol of apocalypse and death. I think that's perfect. There's plenty to chew on here in terms of symbolism. George doesn't just choose any ships to land troops on the northern shore. He chooses Lord Sunglass's ships, piety, prayer, and devotion. There are multiple layers of irony at work here. First of all, Sunglass himself is a prisoner of Stannis and may already have been executed by Selysa Melisandre back on Dragonstone. Yet, here his men are, dying for the king who imprisoned him. Secondly, Stannis has abandoned the faith of the Seven, for which all that prayer and devotion is meant. Those ships named in the faith's honor are forced to fly the flag of R'hllor instead. Thirdly, all the prayers to the faith from the men on those ships and the civilians inside the walls like Sansa do not go answered. Those soldiers are promptly slaughtered by Lannister men-at-arms due to poor strategy. Finally, they are specifically slaughtered by Sandor, who warned Sansa against believing in things like piety and prayer and devotion. Lord Sunglass, like young Catelyn, believed in a just world overseen by smiling gods. But now he's going to be burned alive for a different god, and his men are wiped out by a broken man wearing a monster mask. All of this is relevant to Davos because his piety, prayer, and devotion are for Stannis, his god. He, too, is about to watch his men die for that cause. When we covered Sansa 5, you talked so well about how George establishes the Battle of Blackwater in auditory terms, not visuals. Same rule applies here. Davos first hears the battle joined, the hideous cacophonous sound of wood exploding. Davos leads his Black Betha toward an enemy ship named the Kingslander. He orders his men to loose their arrows upon it. Davos then has to watch the captain of the Kingslander die and admits to himself that he's forgotten the man's name. This stood out to me on reread. Davos is directly responsible for this man's death, and he feels that in his heart. He tries to grant this death some dignity by recalling the man's name, but he can't. So that dignity, that empathy and humanity is gone. It's a sign of how distant Davos is from his old life. He talks about coming home to his city. He talks about knowing every ship so well. But the plain facts are that Davos has not lived here in a long time, and he is not getting any younger. That life and everything that went with it is fading. Again, George is not choosing these ship names at random. Davos himself is a Kingslander. So he has symbolically ordered his own execution. He has used the authority of his new life to sacrifice his old life, like he accepted the loss of his fingers if it meant a better future for his sons. He has forgotten that man's name just like he has left that smuggler's life behind. Coming back on reread after A Dance with Dragons specifically, I can't help but think about how Dany forgets Hazia's name at the end of that book. That life is over now. George is walking a tightrope here, as you were saying. He wants to excite his audience, but also make the point that it can be unwise to think of war as exciting. So he gives us the tightly paced structure of a classic naval battle, a more, slimy blood and guts version of something Patrick O'Brien might write in the Master and Commander vein, Davos takes in the battlefield, makes quick decisions, he leads his men into battle, he sinks and takes enemy ships, he's doing everything he's supposed to do. The pervasive tone of dread and horror undercuts any thrill we might be feeling. George maintains that tone with details specific to Davos. The other captains, from Imry Florent down to Davos's own sons, are fixated on glory. Even Mathos says it, the ship is yours. Davos is the one who hears the pleas of drowning men. As a useless civilian myself, I can still get a sense here of what you had described before about how it seems from this chapter like George himself has served when he expresses lines like, as Davos thinks, men died, but so far none of his. I can't imagine a more succinct expression of what it's like to bear responsibility for your men, knowing that the battlefield involves so much chaos that you really can't keep them safe. And as usual, our friend Stephen Atwell nailed it in his wonderful essay on this chapter. There have been thousands of Waymar Royces throughout history. Brave but stupid aristocrats who'd gotten their men killed because of their fear of looking cowardly or inexperienced. It is also true that there have been thousands of Davoses, working-class, non-commissioned officers given orders by men without an ounce of their experience or ability. Orders they knew to be stupid and pointless, trapped by the class structure and the chain of command, who tried in the midst of clusterfucks, foobars, and snafus to keep their men alive. To hell with the patterns of history. These men are the real heroes of any war.
That's beautifully said, both by yourself and by Steve. And I'll return to a part of his essay that really moved me towards the end of this podcast. But the thing that struck me is, and I know it's hokey, but I recall this motivational poster I once saw, and I actually found it as I was looking through Google Images when I was writing this part of the document. It shows the difference between a quote-unquote leader and a quote-unquote boss, with the boss sitting atop a platform directing the underlings to pull the platform forward while the leader is out in front of the men leading the way. We have a boss, and we have a leader present on hashtag Team Baratheon at the Battle of the Blackwater. Davos is the leader. Stannis, he's kind of the boss here. Now, look, before you jump on me, Frank, I get it, okay? Stannis is in the rear with the gear, doing the strategic oversight of the battle. But does he have to be behind the men dying in battle for him here? What made Robert, Stannis' brother, a legendary and successful commander is that he led from the front. And if you want to say that the king's personage is of the utmost importance, again, look at the example of Robert on the Trident. He's already been crowned king at Riverrun. He's leading from the front, and he fights Rhaegar Targaryen in personal combat. For Stannis' part, he does do better eventually at the Battle of the Wall that we're going to get into in about a year and a half or so, when Jon sees the royal banner flying past him, which I think means that Stannis is taking part in the actual fighting to save the Night's Watch from Mance Rayder. But as we were saying back in Davos 2, that's the last time. This is the last time we're going to see Stannis on page until Davos's fourth A Storm of Swords chapters. 2 weeks ago, I was batting around different ideas about who should lead the attack instead of Imry Florin, Lord Valerian, Lord Celtigar, and I think I have a new suggestion for who should have actually commanded the naval portion of the battle. You want someone with a wealth of naval experience, someone who has commanded amphibious assaults before, someone who is tactically adept and able to modify a plan when cold reality steps in and says, hey, maybe this is a bad choice to go in this direction. Let's try something else. I'm talking about Stannis Baratheon. He fought Victarion and beat him at Fair Isle. He led the amphibious assault at Dragonstone, as Davos recalls in the first part of this chapter. Why isn't Stannis out here aboard the Fury, leading the attack on King's Landing, inspiring his men as a leader, exposing himself to the same dangers that they face? Yes, I'm aware that the naval engagement is the shaping operation. I made that point last week, 2 weeks ago. But Stannis has a wealth of experience to make the shaping operation successful, or to reconfigure his plan and then potentially lead the decisive operation after the shaping operation is concluded. At the Blackwater, it all goes back to the stranger imagery that's surrounding Stannis' attack on King's Landing. It's like Ned told Robb Stark, as Arya recalls, "Know the men who follow you," she heard him tell Robb once, "and let them know you. Don't ask your men to die for a stranger." Robb Stark took that advice to heart and led from the front, winning the loyalty and love of his men, minus a few minor exceptions like the phrase Boltons and Karstarks. Davos and the crews out here on the Blackwater are Stannis' men, but the king is nowhere to be seen. He's a stranger on the battlefield. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I think you make excellent points. There's clear military case for Stannis doing as he does, but I think there's clear missed opportunities as well to make a more personal case for his legend and a stronger bond with his men. Just like, the way Davos feels about Stannis, there's no reason that Stannis can't make other people feel that way. Like, it worked with this one guy. He's just not making the effort to make these personal connections and have people link himself to his victories. I mean, when you get to A Dance with Dragons, you see it is working out somewhat among the common men, but even that's by osmosis. It's not by Stannis, personally going out and making the case. It's as I said, he has the raw materials. I think it's ultimately a choice on his part to be not quite as effective a legend and an image as he could be. But really, we've all been just rolling out the red carpet for the part of this chapter that everyone remembers. A Clash of Kings Davos III builds to the wildfire explosion as flawlessly as the Red Wedding builds to the Reigns of Castamere, or Dany's time in Astapor builds to Dracarys. George sets it all up and then sweeps it all away. As with the Red Wedding and Dracarys, George insists on playing fair with his audience. He follows the Hitchcockian rules of suspense, giving us all the component pieces of what's about to happen, but preventing us from putting the big picture together until it's already happening. We know that Tyrion has been hard at work on the wildfire, and Davos has told us that he senses a trap. George could have just left it there. Instead, he misdirects us. A flash of green caught his eye, ahead and off to port, and a nest of writhing emerald serpents rose burning and hissing from the stern of Queen Alysanne. An instant later, Davos heard the dread cry of wildfire. He grimaced. Burning pitch was one thing, wildfire quite another. Evil stuff, and well-nigh unquenchable. Smother it under a cloak, and the cloak took fire. Slap at a fleck of it with your palm, and your hand was aflame. Piss on wildfire, and your cock burns off, old seamen like to say. Still, Sir Imry had warned them to expect a taste of the alchemist's vile substance. Fortunately, there were few true pyromancers left. They will soon run out, Sir Imry had assured them. So the first-time reader is likely to assume that this is all Tyrion intended for the wildfire. We saw him instructing Jocelyn in this tactic, after all, training the Goldcloaks on how to catapult the wildfire at the ships. So the agonizing shock of the explosion is doubled, because just like Davos, we were led to believe that the danger had passed. Next, Davos spots a flock of small Lannister boats he refers to, disparagingly, as driftwood, thinking they can only serve to get in the way. This is George's beloved threefold revelation strategy at work. We were introduced to the wildfire in Tyrion 5, reminded about it in Tyrion 11, and now he uses it here. There's also a threefold structure within this chapter. First, the catapults use wildfire, and then Davos spots the boats. The tension is being ramped up. Right before everything goes to hell, there is that pause you were talking about, in which Davos takes in the full sweep of the battlefield. Stannis' army is beginning to cross the river, the necessary condition for victory. Davos thinks that Stannis will take this important step forward, but he is not sure that the cost has been worth it. This encapsulates his entire story going forward as he struggles to reconcile these values. Davos has dedicated himself to this cause, trying to bring his family to paradise, and it is now that he doubts it that George condemns him to hell. The swordfish is what dooms them, of course. The ship that exemplifies how the arrogance of the nobles outstrips their intelligence, getting everyone killed. The sail of the swordfish has caught fire, giving it a nightmarish head of flame. George is drawing from Christian imagery here, the tongues of flame hanging above believers on Pentecost, embodying the Holy Spirit. For the true believer, these flames offer purification, filling us with God's gift of life. I think for the lapsed believer, like George or Davos, this head of flame represents the folly of assuming oneself to be in the right, of thinking you have God's purification on your side when really you don't.
And I think also too, it's also like the baptism by fire that they talk about, like your first experience on the battlefield is the baptism of fire, because so many people who are fighting in this battle, this is their first actual battle that they've ever been a part of. And I also like give it too, like that the burning fire that's hanging over all of these ships. It kind of personifies Stannis' burning crown from A Storm of Swords. I know the cost. Last night, gazing into the earth, I saw things in the flames as well. I saw a king, a crown of fire on his brows, burning Davos. His own crown consumed his flesh and turned him into ash. Do you think I need Melisandre to tell me what that means, or you? And it's also the same imagery associated with Khrazzi's necklace after Drogon lights him on fire. As Dany thinks, a lance of swirling dark flame took Krasny's full in the face. His eyes melted and ran down his cheeks, and the oil in his hair and beard burst so fiercely into fire that for an instant the slaver wore a burning crown twice as tall as his head. Now, I'm not sure if George had the idea of the burning crown and the burning crown first, or had the imagery from the Battle of the Blackwater that fed into the what what Stannis and Dany saw later on in Storm of Swords. But I do think that it does kind of feed into each other and represents and personifies each other. You're muted again. Sorry.
Sorry about that, folks. My Steam keeps muting me. I think whether the echoes are deliberate and whether they're not, I think George is clearly obsessed with this kind of imagery because I think, obviously we haven't directly seen Summerhall, but I bet it looked kind of like this. So the Doom of Valyria on a much larger scale, this is the kind of thing George is into. And this is the most kind of skin-crawling, intimate version that we get within A Song of Ice and Fire proper. So we have the swordfish charging one of the driftwood ships. Davos sees that it's leaking something thick and green, and he knows wildfire when he sees it. As George writes it, Davos's heart stops beating. The heart banners they're flying are about to burn, as are his son's, his metaphorical heart. Davos's heart stops beating out of fear, of course, but on another level, it represents how he has become a dead man in this moment, losing everything for which he was living. He reaches for his finger bones one last time, before his luck is taken away along with his son's. He realizes now, far too late, the nature of the deal he has made with Stannis. It was ultimately not about raising them up, it was about giving them over. The captain of the swordfish, as Davos thinks about it, is intent on spearing something with his ungainly fat sword. The sexual metaphor is very clear. The ram is a symbolic penis. The captain of the swordfish is a horny man aiming for a, quote, plump, tempting target, as Davos describes the boat. George used similar language to describe Dany bringing the dragons back. It was a marriage of sorts that sexually excited her and produced magical children. So in a sense, the wildfire explosion is the child of the Lannister and Baratheon fleets, produced by them coming together. Sex and swordplay, fighting and fucking. George always links these things together. The war is the metaphorical child resulting from the clashing kings. You can also see this as a parallel to Melisandre and her shadowy children, with the captain of the swordfish playing Stannis' role as the person who impregnates. As with Dany's dragons, George brings some of his most vivid imagery to bear on the birth of this abominable child. The Lannister ship bursts asunder. It dies as the wildfire comes to the surface, like a mother dying in childbirth, as happened with Jon, Dany, and Tyrion, who might be something resembling the three heads of the dragon. George describes this ship as an overripe fruit, and that phrase reaches back to the description of Aerys's wildfire pots and also forward to the blood oranges of Dorne, which are well past ripe in terms of revenge for that, that civil war. Again, that way of illustrating how the sins of the father linger and rebound upon the children, that Robert's rebellion really is not over, that like all the materials and emotions from it are still around affecting the landscape. The wildfire itself is described as poison from the entrails of a dying beast, which is such powerful imagery, it makes me jealous. It again connects the wildfire explosion to the primal forces of life and death. It glistens, it shines, it spreads across the water. The reader's eyes are growing big, our hands are gripping the pages so tight they might rip. Davos lets loose with a big no and orders his ship to retreat. The oars of Black Betha slide into the water, but not nearly fast enough to escape. So I've compared the wildfire explosion to the Red Wedding, but George lingers over that horror show at length over multiple chapters. Not so really for the wildfire. This has more in common with the shadow assassination of Renly. In the space of a paragraph, everything falls apart. The end of Davos's world announces itself with nothing more than a woof in his ear, and the floor literally falls out from beneath him. His ship, his sons, all the signs of his rise in fortunes climbing the ladder, it's all gone in an instant. He's back in the water from which he came, unsure what way is up, nothing left to him but his seaworth. All he can do is hold on. Then Davos looks up and sees something that nothing in his life has prepared him for. It's one of the great magical images of the series, the eldritch horror of the shadow birth under Storm's End, ramped up to a colossal scale. 50 feet high, a swirling demon of green flame danced upon the river. It had a dozen hands, and each a whip, and whatever they touched burst into fire. What is this thing? This burning light in the sky? No one else ever makes mention of it. Tyrion doesn't seem to see it. He talks about plumes of fire, not something that looks almost alive. It exists only for Davos and for us. For high fantasy fans, the most immediate reference point is Tolkien's Balrogs. For Davos, this is imagine a hobbit staring down a Balrog without Gandalf's help. That's what Davos is dealing with here. Tolkien, of course, did not invent the notion of a furious deity wielding whips of fire. There are echoes of the Greek Furies here, as well as the Gaulish deity Ogmios or Ogmia, depending on the translation. He was sunburnt, he wielded a whip, and he used chains to bind his followers to him. Well, that all checks out with the imagery of the Battle of Blackwater. Fire in the sky also resembles Agni, who is the Vedic fire god within the Hindu faith, and also a metaphorical stand-in for the flow of energy within the universe, the spark within us all. He is born of two fire sticks, like this fire in the sky is born of the two fleets coming together, and Agni ultimately consumes his makers, much as the wildfire does here. He is typically represented as having multiple arms and eating all that is offered to him, which is similar to how the wildfire is presented. Agni is also central to Hindu wedding rituals, embodied by the fire around which the couple ritualistically move as they say their vows to each other. The sense of corruption, however, is pure Catholic energy on George's part. Stannis made a deal with the devil. This is how deals with the devil tend to work out. The very power he tried to master has turned on him. One cannot grasp fire, but that doesn't stop us from trying and burning ourselves in the process. Just ask Icarus or Quentin Martell. I tried to grasp a star, overreached, and fell. That Promethean fire of the gods is too much for the human heart in conflict with itself to handle. The captain of the Swordfish just proved it. So that Inferno is R'hllor. Or rather, it's as close to R'hllor as we're going to get. An elemental force, a godlike avatar of flame. The key line here is, the demon was eating his own. In the moment, it refers to the wildfire destroying Lannister ships, as well as Baratheon ones. But it also suggests that R'hllor will happily feed on its own followers. From the very beginning, with the arrival of autumn, A Clash of Kings has been about a changing world. The forces of wonder and terror are reshaping the landscape, along with every individual soul. We've seen flashes of that transformation at Storm's End, at Winterfell, at Craster's Keep, and the Fist of the First Men. Now we see it in full. The political expansion crashing headlong into the magical expansion. Both kinds of power giving birth to the fiery ladder, and the very river seems to boil.
That's so good, man. And yeah, I had never seen what you were talking about with the demon looking with multiple whips around himself. And wow, that's awesome imagery. And yes, definitely, I think that George is going for the personification of R'hllor here. And I think the imagery thereafter is of the river boiling is also similarly incredible. George really leans deep into his Catholicism biblical imagery. Revelation 16:3 is probably what George is thinking of. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. Even before we get Tyrion's perspective next week, we do see kind of the military sense of what Tyrion was planning here. He didn't only want the wildfire to destroy the ships. He wanted everyone on the water dead, boiling those who managed to evade the fires of the wildfire on the water. In a modern setting, this is very much a war crime. Killing sailors in the water as sailors is a war crime because sailors become non-combatants after they've jumped from their sinking ship. A German U-boat commander by the name of Heinz Wilhelm Eck was convicted and executed for killing sailors after his U-boat sank a merchant vessel in the North Atlantic. And then there's the chain that awaits him. The fleet is burning, and they're chained into a fiery apocalypse by a great chain. The boiling water superheats the chain now, stretching across the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, meaning that those who get swept out by the current then face a red-hot piece of metal. Ships hoping to escape are then run up against that hot piece of metal and are crashed up against it. Now, there's some possible symbolism at work here, with Davos assuming his own chain of office in the next book, with the fires of R'hlloric's sacrifice all around him on Dragonstone. But I don't really feel here that George is going for a straight foreshadowing bit. Instead, Davos has made his bargain. He's thrown in with Stannis and his fire god. He's leveraged good service to advance his family, and now he's lost his family. It's a devastating denouement in the narrative, killing Davos's dreams for his sons and killing his sons all in one fell swoop.
Right? Sorry to be so glib about it, but it's just
right, yeah.
You suddenly see just the mastery of George's tapestry at work. It's just a wonderful thing. And it's not just about Davos, it's also about Tyrion. Now, finally, we understand what he's been up to. We understand the dreadful brilliance of his trap. And we will, of course, have more to say about that when we return to Tyrion's POV. From Davos's perspective, he is now being eaten alive by the mouth of hell. An image which resonates with my earlier references to fire god. This is Moloch, this is Mammon, this is the Inferno of industrialism recast as divine punishment. Again, I get the sense Tolkien would approve of his successor. This is like, the forests of Fangorn burning in Isengard kind of imagery going on here. But the gods don't actually mean all that much to Davos of Flea Bottom. And those are soldiers dying all around him, not priests. So while the Inferno is a spiritually significant moment, the hand of God reaching down, it's also a distinctly military disaster, in which technological changes transform the conventional wisdom of the battlefield. It reminds me of the naval clash between the Monitor and the Merrimack in the American Civil War, the first battle between ironclad ships. And this is how it was described by Lieutenant Samuel Dana Green, who was serving in the Union Army aboard the Monitor. Then, Mother, occurred a scene I shall never forget. Our engineers behaved like heroes, every one of them. They fought with the gas, endeavoring to get the blowers to work until they dropped down, apparently as dead as men ever were. What to do now, we did not know. We had done all in our power and must let things take their own course. It also reminds me of the use of napalm during the Vietnam War and the nuclear strikes on Japan, and these are going to be things I think that are more appropriate to discuss next week when we get to Tyrion and his perspective on what he's done here. Above all, though, the imagery at the end of this chapter reminds me of Dulciet Decorum Est, Wilfred Owen's poem about the mustard gas in World War I. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. The end of Davos III finds George weaving so many strands of military history and religious symbolism into his own poetic expression of the horrors of war, destroying our hero's happiness and delivering him to hell. His story in A Storm of Swords is all about rising from that hell, which wouldn't be so emotionally effective without this low point. As you say, it is devastating.
Yeah, devastating is the exact word that you feel at the end of this chapter, regardless if you're cheering for Tyrion to win the battle or not. You feel a real sense of just emptiness. It's the same feeling you feel at the end of the Red Wedding, almost. I want to say just the sense of overwhelming horror and emptiness and dread and devastation that's unfolding around all of these characters here. And it's George at his very, very best in A Clash of Kings, even if it's only, as you're saying, for just one paragraph in the narrative. And, to kind of conclude this on maybe a more positive note, I don't know. We'll see how this ends up turning out. You were referencing Stephen Atwell's analysis of Davos III earlier. And something I wanted to highlight from the essay is the story where Steve talked about his own grandfather, Reginald Atwell from World War II. Now, I won't spoil what he actually wrote there, but everyone should go and read his take on Davos III after you finish this episode. It's stellar and moving stuff, and it makes me feel things. Probably make you all feel things too. And I'm going to borrow a leaf from Steve and talk a little bit about my own family war legacy in the form of my grandfather, Franklin Hank Hartline. For my family, the military is what we call the family business. We've been soldiers for 3 generations, with my grandfather and his half-brothers starting the tradition by serving in World War II. My grandfather actually joined the Army before World War II, though. He went to West Point and was serving as a junior officer who commanded a rifle company at Pearl Harbor and was heading out to play a round of golf on a bright Sunday morning in December 1941. So you can kind of see where that one ended up. And later in 1945, my grandfather was battlefield promoted to lieutenant colonel and held a battalion command at the Battle of Okinawa, the last major battle of the Second World War. And amidst a brutal advance across the island, the Japanese counterattacked his battalion as it was advancing. And I'll let Robert Leckie, who was featured in HBO's The Pacific from 2010, I think, one of the characters there, who wrote a book called Okinawa: The Last Stand, The Last Battle of World War II, describe things. On the night of April 21st and 22nd, the Japanese counterattacked 3 times against a battalion of the 382nd Infantry, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Franklin Hartline. In one charge, Staff Sergeant David Duvall lifted his machine gun to fire it at the enemy full trigger, severely burning his hands on the red-hot barrel. Duvall was also wounded in both legs, but survived. Meanwhile, soldiers firing light or 60-millimeter mortars elevated their small stovepipes to a dangerously close 86 degrees, dropping shells only 30 yards to their front. Colonel Hartline joined the battle, throwing grenades and firing the weapons of the fallen. And then I found another first-hand account written by a survivor of the battle from 2002, which described what happened next. Lieutenant Colonel Hartline, the former West Point football star, was awarded the Silver Star for his actions on April 21st. He deserved it. That survivor might have thought my grandfather deserved his medal, but my grandfather believed differently, thinking that his men were the ones who actually earned that medal. My grandfather never wore his Silver Star medal. Even in the picture from my mom and dad's wedding from the early 80s, where he wore his dress blues, he only wore one decoration, the Combat Infantryman's badge. And I did post a picture there for folks who are our patrons to take a look at. Now, I never knew my grandfather. He died 1 month before I was born. But I know his father was a dairy farmer from upstate New York. And I have to imagine that Hank wanted a better life for himself and went to West Point and served in the Army for most of his life to achieve that for himself and his family. My grandfather later served in the Korean War. His 3 sons, my 2 uncles, and my father all joined the Army after him, serving after him in Vietnam and in peacetime. And then my 2 cousins and I continued the legacy thereafter. In his analysis on Davos III, Steve concluded by saying that whenever he reads Davos III, he thinks of his grandfather, who had the nickname of Reg. Whenever I read Davos III, I think of my own grandfather, Hank. And, you know, it's cool to think about it in that context. For us, it's a little bit happier than Davos, of course, because Davos lost all 4 of his sons, whereas thankfully, you know, my 2 uncles and my 2 uncles and my father lived on for a little while at least. So yeah, this chapter is moving to me in more ways than simply what's on page. It has a personal resonance to me, and I think the best types of fiction, regardless if it's Song of Ice and Fire or something else, should always have some sort of personal resonance to the reader, and throwing yourself into the narrative just makes it that much more powerful. And so I appreciate what George did for this chapter, and yeah, I appreciate my grandfather too.
Thank you so much for sharing that, man. That was powerful to listen to. You know, I think it gets back to something you were saying about how, you know, George writes in such a way that evokes those experiences, even though he didn't go through it. And what you're saying about how Davos is relatable, because I'll never forget reading Atwell talking about his grandfather, and I'll never forget you talking about yours. And, you know, and my own family tree is mostly made up of people who ran and hid as fast as they possibly could, which I think is a justifiable thing on its own. But I don't like that, you know, that the war stories that come down to my family tree are fragmentary and mostly about powerlessness. And so I have a different relationship to it. But what always strikes me as so powerful in those stories is that it's always everyone else who insists you're the hero.
Right.
And that, you know, that you get the occasional people who are up on that image about themselves, and they tend to just be horrible. But most people are just like, you know, as we're reading Fever Dream for patrons, and as Abner Marsh, the main character, says about his actions in the Civil War, it was a war, it's over, and we won it, and I don't understand why we still have to keep talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's how people who go through it actually feel. What's the Eisenhower quote? I hate war as only those who have been through it have. And it's, you know, I feel like those kind of experiences I try to honor by thinking about them and carrying them with me. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
man. Well, thanks for your words. I mean, it means a lot. And you know, it's also awesome just doing this with you. I know I'm going off script majorly here, but we're not even done the episode yet before we start all of our lovey-dovey talk as we normally do. But it's powerful to do this with you, and having your perspective as the peacenik, and having my perspective as
not even the peacenik. More, you know, peacenik is nice. Coward is the word you're looking for.
You're not a coward. Fuck that shit. You're no coward.
No, but you know, again, like you know, that's just I think that's one of the great things about storytelling specifically is, you know, I could I could, if I had looked up in a museum about like a silver star and seen your grandfather's name, I'd be like, okay, and move on. Right. It wouldn't have the same impact. And the same thing of reading a chapter from Davos and making you feel it. It's one of the reasons we have art, is to get this stuff across as best we can.
You got to feel shit in art, man. You just got to do it. There's no other way to experience art than to feel something about it. You can't just take it objectively and just run with it. You just have to feel it. All right, enough of this emotional shit. Let's talk about foreshadowing groundwork here.
Oh, yeah.
So this is not going to be the last time that Stannis doesn't take Melisandre on campaign with him, as that's what occurs in A Dance with Dragons as he attempts to liberate Deepwood Motte and go for Winterfell. The only difference in Dance, of course, is that Jon plays the Davos role, but Melisandre is already planning on staying at the Wall anywhere, believing it to be a hinge on the world, and that she wants to absorb the powers that are there. So, it's a little bit different in A Dance with Dragons, but the same sort of dynamic exists there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. George always works this triangle, the Stannis, Davos, Melisandre triangle, and he's got to keep them together in some places and very deliberately apart in others. And yeah, obviously, as we'll talk about when we get to Dance with Dragons, Jon does play the Davos role, which is wonderful for many reasons. I think I really enjoy the Jon Stannis relationship, and I just do think it is funny that Stannis just goes, all right, Davos isn't here. I need someone who seems like they have any clue what they're doing. You'll do. It's just delightful. Mm-hmm. So at the very end of this chapter, Davos does see that Salah's ships are safe beyond the chain. He can't reach them, of course, but they are there, and that establishes that Stannis does still have ships to take him back to Dragonstone, and of course, one of those ships will eventually take Davos back as well. So George is just dropping that in there as his little seed that he'll build on when we get to A Storm of Swords.
It's fun, right? Because Salah's such a fun character, in the narrative, and I think him surviving was George being like, yeah, I need some more. I need to have some color in Stannis's obviously dour, drab exterior there. So I'm gonna Salazar San will survive there. And of course, he brings Davos back, and they have that great conversation in Davos' second chapter, where Salazar San essentially leaves him for dead after he tries to convince Davos to sail with him away from Dragonstone, away from the madness of Stannis, but he can't do it, and Davos goes north with Stannis for better or for worse. A lot of that still is undecided, even at this point, waiting for the Winds of Winter just a few days away from, I think, whatever, all the same. And then finally, for foreshadowing groundwork, Davos reaches up and touches his pouch of finger bones for like one last time as he sees the swordfish plowing into the ship heavy with wildfire. This will be the last time that Davos touches those bones, as he'll later talk about losing his luck on the Blackwater. And I do kind of wonder, like, George doesn't make this explicit, but I do wonder if him actually reaching up and touching the bones as the wildfire blows up, whether he actually yanked it off of his hand, so to speak, like his neck, as he was kind of blown back like this, because you kind of, as an explosion, not that I know from personal experience, you kind of get blown back like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then the finger bones went flying into the Blackwater thereafter.
Oh, I never thought of that. That makes sense. Like he had reached to touch it, but then, and then it came loose from him, and then he can't have it again. Yeah, it's great. And it's a wonderful example of George not leaning on a narrative crutch, because like Davos's finger bones, while they're like a good little microcosm of his past, it's like you could easily see a lazier writer like ending every paragraph of every Davos chapter with Davos reached for his finger bones and thought about Stannis, right? There's a version of Davos that's like that, but no, George takes them away after this book, and then in Storm of Swords he keeps reaching for them, but they're not there. It's like perfect character growth. He has to come up with his own kind of way. He can't keep relying on the past and the deal he made with Stannis. He has to make a new one. It's just wonderful characterization. I love that stuff about Davos. So, taking us to our theory/discussion portion of the episode. As we were talking about earlier, the one kind of glimpse we do get of Stannis himself in this chapter is Davos flashing back to Stannis making the decision to not bring Melisandre to the battle, to instead dispatch Melisandre back to Dragonstone with Edric Storm to await the plot of A Storm of Swords, basically. So, the question we want to pose for this episode is whether we think that was the right call. Should Stannis have sent Melisandre back to Dragonstone, or would it have been more wise to bring her along for the battle? And what do you think about that, sir?
Stannis is right.
Well, that was
I think this is one of those things that we talked about. We talked about this a little bit in our post chat about the when we were talking about doing questions and answers on our YouTube channel. So if you are listening to this episode, we do a weekly live stream episode, and of course we answer questions thereafter. We had an extended conversation about what Melisandre's role might have been had she been on the Blackwater. And I just don't see it, right? I mean, at the Battle of the Wall, what happens there is that she uses her fire magic one time to bring down Orell's eagle. How in the world would that have had any impact on the wildfire explosion? How would Melisandre have been able to control the wildfire there? Why did she not even see the wildfire in her flames beforehand? Like, Melisandre's utility seems to be very, very limited, and it's intentionally limited by George, because he has often said that he wants magic and sorcery to be of a low quality as opposed to like the high magic fantasy that we see in other stories. So I think that there's a narrative factor that's limiting Melisandre that George is doing intentionally, but at the same time, like, I just don't see the utility of having Melisandre on the Blackwater itself. Would she have been able to redirect the green flames? I mean, Melisandre makes a lot of very extravagant claims, and she later talks about those extravagant claims when she has her own point of view chapter, and phrases that in the context of, I need to say these like really powerful, strong things and be like really like direct and intentional in what I'm saying, because I need to convince these people that I'm obviously right, and I need to make I need to kind of overstate and use embellishment in order to achieve that purpose and those ends. And it's great that Melisandre's not at the Blackwater, because now all of a sudden she has a rhetorical argument that she can use there afterwards, right?
Isn't that convenient? That's true. And you can't falsify it because you can't go back and check.
Right.
So yeah, no, you're totally right. It fits very well into Melisandre's little game, where you can't, even if Davos senses that she's full of shit at some level, he can't quite figure out how, because she's just, she's really impressive at managing information and constructing these rhetorical traps. And Frank is making an excellent point in the chat that really Melisandre's battle utility is potentially just as radar, because she does suggest, it's strongly suggested that she looks for danger to herself in the flames and a storm of swords, and then in the Dance with Dragons she goes ahead and confirms that's what she looks for first. Who's coming for me? That's how she knows Davos is trying to kill her in a storm of swords, and that's how he tricks her by saving Edric Storm instead. Again, just great storytelling on Storm of Swords. Can't gush enough about Davos' chapters there. But so I think there is the case we made that Melisandre would be useful, because she might pick up on something like, oh, I'm in danger, and realize that I don't know, like Tyrells are coming, or that the wildfire is there. Like there's a potential for her to be useful in that regard. And I think that's definitely a fair point. I think for me, the overall point though is that I don't know if Stannis knows any of this. Like, I don't know if Stannis knows that Melisandre always looks for danger to herself in the flames. I don't know if she's told him that. I don't know if Melisandre has told Stannis that she has powers that could control the wildfire. I don't know if she tried to make that case. We don't see that happen. So, in terms of trying to avoid presentism is basically what I'm trying to get at here. What does Stannis know? And given what Stannis knows, I think it is foolish for him not to bring Melisandre, because maybe she won't be useful. But what's the downside, man?
True.
That the only downside is she might get the credit, which is what he really can't stand. That's the thing. Like, would Stannis even want the throne if Melisandre made it happen with a giant fireworks show? Because then he'd be like, everyone thinks she's cool. So ultimately, I think it's, I have no idea what Melisandre could do. I think George is deliberately keeping that ambiguous. But like Stannis's whole thing is like, maybe she can do more. I mean, to find out. Well, then fucking this is the show, man. What do you have her for if not this? So yeah, I think he should have brought her.
Well, I was thinking about that too. Like the thing that finally convinces Stannis not to bring Melisandre is that they're like, well, she's going to get the credit, dude. You don't want that to happen. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Isn't Stannis's fleet and his army going to get the credit for Stannis taking King's Landing? Aren't there other people that are like pushing Stannis onto the Iron Throne here that actually deserve the credit here? I mean, I was talking about my grandfather earlier. Like, my grandfather was ordered and refused orders to wear his silver star by superior officers and got in trouble for it. And the rumor is that he wasn't promoted as general because he refused to, because he never made up to a full general, because he would just tell superior officers to fuck off when they would like tell him to do these things. Like he doesn't want the credit for taking. He doesn't want the credit to go to anyone else besides himself. So does that make Stannis the type of guy that you were talking about before, that you're like, yeah, this guy fucking sucks because he just wants the credit all for himself for doing something that other people are doing for him, right?
Yeah, I think, it's the personal and political is hard to parse here. Like, Stannis does acknowledge Davos as very important. Like he says to Jon, Davos was right and I was wrong. And good thing Davos was there because I was messing up. So he is willing to concede, I think, that, he can be incorrect things and that not literally the entire universe is about him. I think Stannis is willing to get that far. I think the problem is really just comes down to Robert and Renly. And anything that gets remotely associated with Robert and Renly. And it's like, yeah, obviously Melisandre, she literally killed Renly for you, dude. But it's still like someone getting credit for a battle specifically. Like, that's too much. It's like, when Asha was talking to Stannis in that one dance chapter, and it's going okay until she brings up Robert. And then Justin Massey's like, yeah, no. You gotta go walk away right now. No. Never mention ixnay on the Robert Ray. So I think that's ultimately what it is in terms of Stannis not bringing Melisandre. And I think, he just should have. He really just needs to get over that. And I know that's easy for me to say, but like that resentment, I think, is what makes him tragic and compelling to a certain extent, because that's the hole inside. Like, that's something he lost and just didn't have. But it's also like, it's just they're both dead. It's over. You win. All the toys are yours. They're out of their rooms. And it's just, but I think that's, again, relatable, because I think all of us have been or know people who, once you have a grievance, you start to love it after a while and starts to become part of your life. And it's like letting that go is like, but then who am I if I don't hate my brothers? What is my personality?
Right.
I get that.
I totally get that too, man. I definitely think that it becomes like a part of who you are. The Hatfields and the McCoys, you only know them because they hated each other, right? That's their entire personality as a historical family. So it's same dynamic applies for Stannis of House Baratheon here, as he essentially loses the Battle of Blackwater at this point. Yes, they're going to make a desperate attempt to win it in the next couple Tyrion chapters, rather, which of course we'll be covering next week, but should be a lot of fun. But yeah, the battle is essentially lost here with the wildfire, and maybe Melisandre could have made something of a difference to aid Stannis in winning the battle. Who knows? But it's a great what if situation, something we'd never really entertain here in the Not a Cast podcast, but it's fun to do that once in a while.
I think it is a useful one because of what you're saying, because of when you get the story and you realize, George specifically did it that way so Melisandre would have the benefit of the doubt and be able to say, if only I had been there. And I think that's a really smart way to construct things, because that's what Melisandre is. She's always half legit and half bullshit, and no one is able to tell which it is. And I love that stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I think that is going to wrap us up for a Clash of Kings Davos 3 Part 2. No, my boy Stannis, my boy Davos, survive. Which, of course, he will survive, as we'll cover back with him and Stone of Swords. But I can't believe we're done another point of view for a Clash of Kings.
It's true. We got 2 down, and all the rest, and after the Blackwater, the rest go one by one. After the battle is done, they get their final chapters. We
are so close to finishing a Clash of Kings, folks, and we really appreciate you joining us on this journey. And if you have enjoyed this journey through a Game of Thrones and a Clash of Kings, please consider rating and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Hit the thumbs up on YouTube and hit the bell button to get alerted whenever we're going to do one of these live casts. So yeah, that'll be awesome. You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/notacastASOIAF. You can follow us on Twitter at notacastASOIAF, or shoot us an email at notacastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can find me at PoorQuentin on Twitter or at PoorQuentin.com. And you can find me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter. Brendan Beefish on website is warsandpolitics.wordpress.com. We want to shout out and thank our high lords and ladies on Patreon. Red Relu himself, who has renounced his allegiance to the Squishers. Lady of 1,000 Words, Septon Eastwood of Introvert Isle. Septon Maribald, the Shoeless Sage. Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood. Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North, and Keeper of Secrets. Sandy the Dragon, Blood of Queen Daenerys and Lady of Jameson. Lady Britt, Bastard Mistress of Harrenhal. Sir Thomas the Raven Knight, Lord of Blackwood. Lady Dillsdale, the Star Spirit of Crescent Hill. Sir Way of Course. Matt, Warden of the Sanguine Shore. Lord Sam Kay. Sir Michael Mertens. Wisdom Benjicott, Alchemist of Sets and Quanta, Mage of the Arts of Bull de Morgan. Tibbs the Great of House Catnapping. Lord J. Manderley, Baker of the Frey Pies. Septon Merriful, Head of Hair. Lady Silverwing. Joe Snow, King of the Metro North and Protector of the Tri-State. Kaboth the Unfrozen, Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light. Sir Keith of House Corbray, Leader Forlorn. Lord Andrew, Warden of the Dubai Sands. Ryan Noy, Forger of the Mighty Hammer and Keeper of the King's Anvil. Lord Young of the Ghost Woods. Lady Mira Reed, Wielder of Dark Sister, Slayer of Tinfoil. Lady of Rainy Afternoons. Sir Will of the Anarcho-Syndicalist Commune. Lord Clay, Sir Small Paul, Guardian of the Stone Haven, Defender of Dunatar Castle. Septon T-Bone, Refined Wrangler of Icy Arachnids.
Lady Veronica, caretaker at the Inn of the Crossroads, Lady Danielle of House Lannister, Titanium Pirate, Lady Carly, Lady Joan, Lady Ranger of the Frostfangs, and Lady Amy Blackfire, analyzer of Chinese literature and dismantler of the patriarchy. Thank you so much, as always, to our high lords and ladies.
Absolutely. Thank you, folks, so much for all your support. We really, really appreciate it. So join us next week for a Clash of Kings Tyrion 13, in which Tyrion stares down his mushroom cloud and then shockingly decides to ride out to do battle himself.
It's going to be almost as exciting as Davos III, folks. We're going to flip back to the Tyrion side and see just some of the most just viscerally impressive stuff in the whole series. Can't wait.
Cannot wait for that as well. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you to those of you who watched us. Thank you again to all of our patrons, and we'll see you all next week for Tyrion 13.
Okay.
Sweet. I'm going to use the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back to do questions and answers if you want to hold the fort for a little while.
But of course, we'll just talk about you the whole time. Please don't. This MFer just said, please don't. Anyway, how is everybody? Not that I care. Hope everyone's holiday seasons ongoing are tolerable. I swear, I've just forgotten how to talk to people in person. I used to be fine at that, and now it's just that's just a skill that's just atrophied like a muscle. Ugh, I'll have to redevelop it, I guess. Maybe not. Jeff has adorable children. I have I'm just the maw of age that is visiting relatives. It's fine. You're allowed to get old. You don't. The alternative is what it is. But it's just it's grim. Just that it's there's that line in the movie Babe, just when the duck gets on top of the farmhouse and screams, "Christmas means carnage." That's the mood. It's the vibe. How far away from sleeveless Emmett? No one needs that. No one needs my emaciated excuse for shoulders in front of your faces. People see me. If I turn sideways, I vanish. Yeah, I'm working on the stop aging, Frank. I'm working on that. I'm just pretty sure I'm convinced that I personally can't die. But I don't know what the rest of you are going to do.
Are you everything okay?
Oh, sure. Everything is just fine. We're just
good.
Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows.
Yes, indeed. Oh my goodness.
SKNC asks, "Is there an alternative to getting old?" Yeah, it's called dying.
Fucking dying. Yeah.
That's what the alternative to getting old is.
Don't do that. Don't die. Oh man,
being grim. Oh, Frank asks, "What is your favorite part of podcasting with Jeff?" Jeff is delightful. You people don't understand how happier I am about life every time I talk to Jeff for a couple hours. I can't even go to sleep right away. I just got to sit around being happy. Interacting with Jeff is preposterously other people have to do podcasts with other human beings, and I see them and I'm just I'm not even a human being. Miserable experience.
Yeah. No, it's I love podcasting with you because both it's fun, right? So for us, the podcasting experience is not just us getting on StreamYard once a week or on Skype every other week to do a Patreon episode or to do a Fever Dream episode. It's also watching, I get to watch this in real time, watch Emmett work on the document itself. And I've gotten to the point now that we're 140 episodes into this where I can literally hear your voice as you're typing. And even as you're thinking, because I'll see you backspace and I'll see wait, okay. So then I can hear your voice and it's great. So it's
yeah, that's 3 adverbs too many. I got to bring it down. Well, thank you, sir. No, I love being able to write for and with someone else and knowing their voice well enough that I can see the episode structure between the two of us. It's just great. It's wonderful.
It really, really is. It's such a blast. I mean, we get all lovey-dovey, but I mean, it's actually real. I mean, if that sounds like
I feel the same way. Exactly.
People are asking if we shop for our glasses from the same place. Do you go Lens Crafters? Is that your?
Oh, it's true. That's just how it turned out, folks.
Yeah. Sorry.
I was gonna wear contacts today. I usually wear contacts for the live stream, but then I thought, no.
You
was the full extent of my thinking. I wore contacts a couple times during a vacation, and my eyes were like unpleasant.
Yeah, I usually actually I'm so vain that I usually don't wear glasses unless I'm like looking at a computer screen. But I don't wear contacts either when I'm not looking. When I'm just
You just
walking around.
squint manfully.
Squint, yeah. For a long
Clint
time,
Eastwood.
like I thought, like that was how you're supposed to look. Was like this, like just squinting all the time. I wasn't
True.
like I wasn't
Those
like
sexy,
trying to be
sexy
like
crow's eyes.
yeah, I wasn't trying to be like Clint Eastwood from The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I was trying to be to actually see things because they look so much clearer when I wasn't like squinting. So
Right? What a concept.
indeed. All right, let's take some questions here.
Why not?
Okay, here's a fun one. Micah asks, hashtag not podcast. I've been getting back into Age of Empires 2. Have you guys played? I have a lot of fun with games like that, even though I've only played Age of Empires.
I have not. I know that's Chloe's kind of thing. Yeah, I like those. I'm always theoretically into games like that, and then I get like increasingly bored. Because just like I grew up watching movies, and there's a certain part of me that's lazy in terms of like that kind of activity required. I don't know why I find it so much easier with writing than with video games, but like world building in video games, when I have to do it, it just drives me insane. And like I'm just not imaginative in that way. Like I've tried to do like Sims and Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing and those kind of games that Chloe plays, and like my houses are like, here is a walkway and then there is a triangle. Like I just don't like, it's not that they're not fun. I'm just like, I don't, there's like a part of my brain that just isn't good at that.
Yeah, I get that. So yeah, when I was a teenager, I played Age of Empires 2. I think
There you go.
Was that coming out in the late 90s, early 2000s? Either or. I played that game to death. I mean, I would always play the Gold Rush map, and I would be the asshole because I'm an American. I would just build like walls around like all of the gold in the middle of the map, and then I would so everyone would get really poor, and I would get really rich. No real
Sure, checks out.
no real modern parallels or anything like that. In terms of resources, I actually don't really play a lot of. I used to play more computer games, but I actually, for vacation, I played. A friend of mine from college and we've been playing multiplayer version of a campaign for Rome 2 Total War, which is now a fun game after apparently like 7 years of debugging it and revamping it. So yeah, so we have fun with that. Crusader Kings would it sounds really fun in concept, right?
With the GOT mod, yeah, that is cool. I enjoy, again, like glancing over to it when I'm on the couch with Chloe and go, oh, that looks really interesting. But yeah, no, I love seeing all the crazy, like the intricate genealogies and backstabbing things she gets into. It's a trip. I enjoy that. Even if I don't enjoy the mechanisms of it, I enjoy watching other people figure them out. So that's fun for me.
Yeah, so I mean, like we have. Has Chloe done any streams of Crusader Kings? I think she has done for her patrons, right? Maybe.
Yeah, well, I don't know if she did the Crusader King stream for a patron. She's over on Discord. They do a lot of great stuff. Girls Gone Canon Discord. You should definitely sign up for their Patreon. Get over to their Discord if you haven't, because they do great like monthly brunch things and stuff. I'm not sure if they did Crusader King streaming, but they've done other gaming stream stuff on their Discord.
I mean, it's fun to like watch. I mean, I watch on occasion. I'll watch Joe the Magician, aka Matt, or our friend, of course, Aziz from History of Westeros. They do stream their Crusader Kings games. I'm like, wow, that looks like a lot of fun, but man, that looks like a lot of work to have to learn that game. I just don't have the fucking time. Like, how do you people have the time to do this? I mean, I've got
right. Or like I like Risk or Axis and Allies, but like that's the fun of like defeating another person who's 6 inches away from you. Like that's a little different. That's it's a different kind of thing.
Yeah, I enjoy those types of board games too. I got to introduce you to the next time we hang out. I'll bring up my a game you would probably really enjoy. What's it called? I play it every year at vacation with my in-laws. It's a Western themed game. I'm gonna look this up real quick while I'm talking.
Oh, okay.
Themed board game. What's it called? Gosh. Someone's gonna gonna do that. No, what? I'll figure it out.
Yeah, remember it. I would love to. Yeah,
I'll bring it up. It's a lot of fun. You basically play as role players, like the sheriff and the deputy, and like the outlaws. And you have a renegade in there. It's great fun.
That sounds delightful. I'll be the guy playing the piano that looks up when someone walks in. That's my job in any Western. Is just the guy like on the saloon piano. I always relate to that guy.
Oh, it's so much fun. All right, let's take some more questions. Sure. Excellent question from Alan V, who asked, do you think Stannis is a bit of a hypocrite for considering Rhaenyra a usurper, considering that she, like him, believed that she was fighting for her rights?
A bit of a hypocrite. That's generous. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's because she's a woman. Sorry. I'm sorry to pull that card, but pretty consistent thing with Stannis.
About to say the misogyny is the thing that's actually ruling Stannis here, and that he looks at Rhaenyra and is like, a woman on the Iron Throne. My nether regions are resuscitating into my body cavity.
I might have to listen to what yeah, no, exactly. And it's, yeah, it's like Stannis, like she was on Dragonstone, the same place you're starting from. Right. And she's, getting overtaken by the guy who has all the symbols of rulership around him, just like Renly, the guy you hated, but no, can't he just can't get away from it. It's just like, and I think we've all met men like this. It's like a physical discomfort thing. Like you really can't stand to be in the same room with Selyse for more than like 30 seconds before he's like, I'm going to jump out a window. It's that Office meme of like Dwight is standing smiling and Angela comes upon him. He's just like, fuck. That's Stannis and Selyse all the time. That's just, he extends that to lots of things.
Yeah. But it's totally virtuous. It's totally,
Oh, sure. Because women are full of sin and idolatrous, and I just, yeah. Again, there was that old school football coach vibe to Stannis sometimes in that regard.
Yeah.
Not as bad as Randall Tarley. Randall Tarley's like a much worse version of everything we're saying here.
And Tywin also is even worse.
Tywin and Victarion to a certain extent.
Yeah, Victarion's bad. Yeah, it's just bad. Misogyny is bad. Like it hurts people too.
It really seems to lead to death and sadness.
Weird.
Okay.
The burning question that I've seen many times over the years in the fandom. MZY Raj, who is a frequent watcher of ours, thank you for watching, asked, do you think Melisandre could have somehow had Davos's finger bones? She mentions a bag of finger bones as possible for a glamour in her point of view chapter, and that sounds suspicious to me.
Wait, what is your take on this, sir? Remind the audience.
No, she does not have a bag of his finger bones. Do you think Melisandre went deep diving into the Blackwater Rush in order to grab the bag of finger bones, retrieved it, and brought it up in the time that... No, I think it's entirely... Melisandre talks about having the bag of finger bones, and I think she says it and it's been a minute since I've read the Melisandre chapter, but she says it in the context of using the glamour for Rattleshirt for Mance Rayder, right? She uses like the bones to make people believe that Mance Rayder is actually Rattleshirt, though. So I don't think that's the case. Sorry.
I really hope it's not, because that is just such a stretch that Melisandre has those. Like, again, like after we were saying about like how George has carefully like not shown us too much of Melisandre's powers and doesn't want her to be like this big fireworks show center of attention and wants it to be more creepy and just implied and described. But then she has Davos's finger bones. Look, I'll accept it if it is the vehicle to get us to an amazing scene I can imagine in which Melisandre disguises herself as Davos to like convince Stannis to do. Like I could see that being amazing, but also like logistically, what Davos, quote unquote, Davos walks in and says, "King Stannis, I've apparently been here, even though you haven't seen me and thought I was dead. By the way, I just came by to encourage you to do something I would absolutely never encourage you to do, namely burn your daughter. Bye, I'm going to leave now." And then he walks out and Melisandre walks back and like, "Look, Davos, I just missed him." Like, there's a silliness to that.
Yeah.
But it is hard, she does mention it, and that is weird. So I could see it happening, but I really hope it doesn't, because I think that's preposterous.
Preposterous is the right way of putting it. Yeah, it's not something that I really want to see happen. And this maybe that's my problem, is that I hate the imagining like the logistics of Melisandre getting a ship, getting out to the Blackwater Rush, somehow diving below,
getting her wetsuit on, big goggles. Come on, man.
that seems like a little stretch. Now maybe if she had Patchface go down there, since he was apparently under the sea for 3 days,
Sure,
like that. Yeah,
again, it's always an execution, right? We're just imagining a scene the way we might write it. Maybe George would write it better, but that is one thing I will have to suspend my disbelief if that's going to happen.
Agreed. All right, Alicia, who is that again? Not Alice.
Never heard of her.
Never heard of her. Never. Yeah. She asks, speak on the possible Sansa and Stannis interactions, and do you think he would ever make her Lady of Winterfell? Yeah. Jon somewhere is king in the north, but Stannis and Sansa. Okay. So this is a good question because one, it's something I've been thinking a lot about recently. So if you've read Fire and Blood Volume 1, there is two characters that interact in the north during the reign of Jaehaerys I, and that is Queen Alysanne and Lord Alaric Stark. And I'm not the first one to point this out, but Alaric Stark seems very, very Stannis-like. He seems like a Stannis archetype in the story. And Queen Alysanne seems very much like a Sansa architect in the story. Or archetype. There's the word I'm looking for in the story. And the way that they interact with Alaric being all rough and like, oh, I don't want these Targaryens in my castle and the dragons need to stay out. And eventually warming up to Queen Alysanne. And the maybe possible hint that they have a relationship there as well. Did you get that impression from Fire and Blood that they might have?
Yeah, that's talk about softening and laughter and such. Yeah, that's I totally agree. They're written strongly to evoke those two. And I definitely enjoyed reading them in that light in Fire and Blood. That's definitely some stuff I liked a lot. I definitely, think Sansa is going to be coming up the White Knife into White Harbor and spend some time probably with the Lady Manderleys there. I think that's maybe why George introduced the Manderley women, more of them in A Dance with Dragons, while Davos was in White Harbor. And
the Alysanne, not the Council of Women, was the women's court that that she holds at White Harbor as well.
100%. That's a great point. I think Sansa's definitely doing her version of that. And I do think Stannis will be in some fashion successful in the battle over Winterfell because he can't die yet because Shireen's not there. So he has to stick around. He has to, justify his existence long enough to get back to her, to burn her. So I can see the structure there. This is one of those things, like many things when we talk about the Winds of Winter, that where the timing and the amount of things that has to happen makes me skeptical as much as I would love to see it happen. I just don't know if Stannis is going to be around that long, specifically involved in northern politics that long. And I do think Jon as king in the north kind of emerges as the compromise choice. And I do think Stannis has to be around for that because I think he has to get rejected by Jon and by the Northmen. So I could see an interaction, but I think it would have to be like in passing, like, some sort of council session, like we've had with Targaryen crowns before, another great council of some kind. If we have something to do with that over the rule of the North and Stannis is still around, then I could see them interacting. And that would be delightful. And, that's the fun of Stannis as a character, is having him interact with everyone, with different people, because watching everyone be exasperated by having to talk to Stannis is a lot of fun as they all go, wait, what is it I have to say to make you behave? That's ridiculous. Do I really have to say, okay, fine, you're a good boy. Better than Robert even. Now can we talk? That's hysterical. So I would love to see Sansa trying to be a good politician, Sansa learning her skills. I'm learning how to talk in these rooms and talk to these people. Oh, I've reached the hardest diplomatic challenge of my young life, getting through 15 minutes with Stannis Baratheon. That would be hysterical. I don't know if there's room for it, but I would love to see it.
I honestly really hope that actually ends up being the case in the Winds of Winter, that we see a Stannis Sansa interaction. It'll be interesting in all sorts of ways, because you also have Littlefinger, who's probably still going to be alive at that point as well, and Stannis really hates Littlefinger. So yeah,
feeling is mutual. Yep.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. We'll see what ends up happening with that at some point down the road, hopefully relatively soon. All right. Mick asks, do you think House of the Dragon will make dragons look cooler than in Game of Thrones? Also, do you think the riders will have saddles? If yes, why do you think Dany and Jon did not have them? I'm assuming from Game of Thrones.
Do you know anything about the saddles? I don't know anything about that. Is it just because they would look goofy?
Dany doesn't have I mean, in the books, she doesn't have a settle with Drogon because the Drogon shows up at Daznak's pit and she jumps on his back and flies away.
So far, I could see her maybe constructing one, if need be. But I also think they might look kind of silly, on screen. I think that if unless they really cheap out, which I don't think they're doing, I have no reason to expect the dragons are the selling point,
right?
More than anything, so they have to make them look good.
House of the Dragon, right? So
in the name, folks, it's they made the Iron Throne an iconic visual of Game of Thrones, so one hopes. Even when Game of Thrones was, not pleasing people story-wise, they always understood, okay, what's the image? What's the thing?
Right.
What's the shot? What's everyone going to be retweeting and freaking out about? I think they pursued that to a fault sometimes, but they do get that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dragons are likely going to be similar between Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. I mean, I had really no complaints about the way they did Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal in the show. I think the VFX, regardless of where the writing went in later seasons, the way that they really poured money into doing the VFX for the dragons was outstanding, in my opinion. I think there's nothing really to complain about there. I know some folks might have some more minorish complaints. I think it's actually really, really good. So yeah, I think the budget's going to be similar to Game of Thrones. I'm curious. The one thing I am curious about for House of the Dragon is so in Game of Thrones, the dragons, there's only 3 of them in the entire known world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're on screen and they have such a major impact because of how few of them there actually are. During the time of the Targaryens, there's 15, 20 dragons that are around somewhere. I mean, I'm trying to remember the exact number of dragons that existed. Because you have also the dragon seeds who are getting the wild dragons out of Dragonstone and all the dragons. Yep. So I would just be curious how they're going to do that whole 15 dragons on screen. I can imagine the optics of the battle over the God's Eye being just fucking outstanding. I can imagine the dragon versus dragon combat that we see over Storm's End between Jace and that asshole. There's so many of them. I'm blanking on his name right now. Aemond.
Oh, Aemond,
One Eye.
Of course.
That being super awesome too, but can you get dragon overload in the show visually? I
think it's possible. I mean, there's a reason I think that the standard for high fantasy, or the best high fantasy, is you don't show the overwhelming magical realm at its height. You show it after the height. You don't show. Lord of the Rings is not about the elf kingdoms in their glory days. That's what the Silmarillion is for, and the Silmarillion didn't sell nearly as well as the Lord of the Rings, because I don't think that's actually really what most people love. I think seeing the sad, decaying, forgotten world, that world going away, I think people relate to that more because it mirrors the process of growing up and changing your relationship to these stories. So obviously there are many exceptions to this general rule, but I do think it runs up against what you're talking about, where the dragons had such an impact in Game of Thrones because they were special and because they were rare and because that, was presented in visually and how everyone's eyes swelled up when they saw them, like they were looking at there's a reason Jurassic Park is more exciting than 10,000 BC. And that's because Jurassic Park takes place in the present, and there's many reasons why. Jurassic Park takes place in the present, so dinosaurs are a miracle. So you're just everyone is just in awe, and you worship everything around them. And it's I think with dragons just in their world, I think it's politically interesting. It's anthropologically interesting. I think you have to try harder to make drama out of it. I think they certainly can, but I think that's an obstacle.
I agree. I absolutely agree. All right, Frank. Hi, nice new picture there. Is that a Mallory picture? I think it is actually. He asks, I have a question from today's Twitter. What would be the most horrifying part of a Stannis Daenerys ship?
This is your responsibility. How dare you?
I mean, can you not say the only really answer is the actual sexual intercourse that would occur between them, right? Should I go into detail?
No. I mean, sure, that's what the people want, I guess.
I can let you go into detail if you want to.
It's just so uncomfortable. Just like because as I said when you brought this up for some reason on Twitter, that just like I'm trying to imagine which of them would be more uncomfortable with this. Because you say obviously Dany, because who would want to sleep with Stannis, and that's not her type at all. But also Stannis, like it took Melisandre a while, and Melisandre is pretty. Stannis again, he's not horny. He doesn't like ladies. This is like, and Daenerys is like all in charge and such. He can't possibly have that. So yeah, you would have to have, it would have to be at gunpoint for both of them.
I want you to picture something, like get into your imagination place. Okay. So remember in a Game of Thrones how Dany's handmaid talked to, was it about how to like the sexual position to go on?
No.
All right, so we're imagining now Stannis Baratheon sitting the Iron Throne,
plank wobbling beneath her. Oh, is he sitting the Iron Throne?
Sitting the Iron
Oh
Throne.
my god!
And Daenerys, mounts iron, hard, brittle, and it breaks.
Brittle. No,
breaks. It breaks. It breaks. It can't bend because it can't bend.
Oh god. Poor woman.
Anyways, Alan asked if those winners coming out 2020.
It's just you just needed a mind bleach. Ugh. I feel bad for the throne in that scenario. Somehow. Ouch.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
Anyways,
again, this is entirely your responsibility.
Guilty Undertaker asks, if things go slightly different and Stannis ends up with King's Landing, how does he deal with the Lannister/Tyrell army?
Okay, so as in like, let's say Imry Florent is smarter, or the wildfire just doesn't happen, and Stannis gets across the river and takes the city and like kills Joffrey and Cersei and Tyrion, and then like an hour later, Tywin shows up. Yeah, what do you think happens then?
I'm sorry, I'm still working my way over there. Okay,
yeah, once you've recovered from that.
Okay, so Stannis would be on the north side of the Blackwater and have the ability to be resupplied from the sea, right? So he has a pretty line of resupply. He also has the north. He'd probably end up taking Duskendale and Maidenpool, most likely, because he would need those cities in order to supply him with food and such. I think the Tyrells might toss the Lannisters off. They might be like, well, there's like 15,000 of you and 80,000 of us, so yeah, I think we're gonna find greener pasture north of the Blackwater, and by swearing to Stannis. I mean, the Tyrells are ultimately they're They're basically the Freys with nicer clothes and better manners, right? I think that's the way we described them previously in the previous podcast. So I think that's primarily what they would do. They'd be like, okay, sorry, Tywin, you lost. Sorry, dude.
Right. Cool. Tywin turns around, the Tyrells are just backing away quietly. Like, Well, and that's the thing, like, they would still have the bigger army, and there's the Tommen situation to consider, because he is at Rosby. Tywin doesn't know that, but presumably word gets to them that of what has occurred. If Tywin finds that out in time, I think that could potentially change things, because he does still have a considerably bigger army than Stannis does. But I don't know if he finds that out in time before the Tyrells go, yeah, no, and just the Tyrells probably go to Stannis and go, look, we know we've screwed you over repeatedly, but how about we bend the knee and you barely restrain yourself from murdering all of us? Right. And Stannis probably goes, I don't like it, but fine. So I think that's probably the likeliest scenario.
I think that's most likely what happens as well. And then the Tyrells are like, well, you do still need to like fight the Northmen at some point, and you're going to need an army to do that. And we have the armies, so
That is true. Yeah, and
and
you got the Vale and Dorne and the Iron Islands. You know, a lot of cleanup work still for Stannis to do. So I think he would have to make his peace with the Tyrells. I do think he would probably try to kill Tywin though.
I agree 100%.
And I can't blame him for that.
No, cannot as well. SKNC asks, why do you think George R. R. Martin decided to make it so that most of his point of view characters have few or zero friends?
That's grim. I don't know. I mean, Jon has friends. Arya has trauma buddies. You can call them. Friends implies you're enjoying yourselves together, but you know, she has people with whom she survives. Yeah. I don't. I guess maybe it's just because of the POV structure that George, I guess more focuses on individuals that way. But he doesn't seem hugely interested in groups of people.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Like it doesn't, particular like the gang of students that hangs out at the beginning of A Feast for Crows. That's there's not that many of those. In A Song of Ice and Fire, which is like a group of 4 people, and it's not really clear who the main one is. In story terms, like that's not, George doesn't do many gangs of people like that. And I wonder why that is, because that's true in Fever Dream too. It's all like one person and two, it's all pairs and individuals. Mm-hmm. It's not like, Abner occasionally talks about his people on the ship as being a big team. That's not really what the book is about. So that's an interesting question. That's not really George's focus. Yes.
Do you get the impression that George, like maybe in his own life, just has a few like close friends that he's like really close with? I mean,
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Yeah. Or I mean, also the way to think about it is like everyone did have friends during Robert's Rebellion.
Right.
Now they don't anymore. So maybe that's, you could extend to like George has happy condes in the 70s. And now it's like, oh, well, now I'm 50.
Yeah.
Now people who were just close to you. So that's just part of aging, I guess, maybe.
Oh God! Well, aging gets brought up again. Ugh.
Well,
but it's true though. I mean, like
a couple of close relationships instead of just the swarm, and maybe just because, if maybe like Sansa going hanging out at Marjorie's court, like she has friends for like a second, and then they're taken away.
And I mean, like, and I think about that too. Like, as you get older, I mean, all these like to start with, like Ned and Catelyn are in their mid-30s, which is where I'm at right now.
Sure,
I've got a few close friends I keep in contact with, you being one of them. And, I've got my wife and my children. And that's what Ned and Catelyn have. Those are the people that they're primarily interacting with. And most everyone else is a work acquaintance or people that they're working with or working for them. So I think that's, yeah. I mean, like when I was in college, I could walk over down the dorm room and have like a couple beers with some folks or, chat with people or, not that I've ever done this, but maybe like take the guitar out to like the hallway of the dorm room and start playing some Dashboard Professional, stuff like that. Gather a little crowd there.
Bless you. Yeah. Like, being surrounded by your people is not a main thing in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's much more the sensation of I used to be, or I never was surrounded by my people, I think is emotionally more where it's at.
I mean, just look at how excited Ned gets after he learns that Robert is coming up.
I know. That's so heartbreaking in retrospect. Mm-hmm. It's like, Catelyn's like, wow, you can smile like that? Who knew?
Wow, yeah. And it's just like, wow, this...
Tony says in the chat that that the Stark kids don't have cousins, which, as multiple people have pointed out, really makes no sense at all. That the Starks don't have cadet branches, and like you can go back at the family trees, like where are those descendants? They should clearly be existing. But George, wants the Stark kids to be isolated and sad and not have family, so they can't have those. Yeah,
that's primarily the reason that we're going on here. All right, let's do a few more.
Yeah, sure.
I'm having fun.
Absolutely. Clint says in the chat, I used to be surrounded by people. The motto of 2020. That's true. It's true. We're all like, it's just the end of a movie when we're looking back, like the times we had, except just we're as a species.
Right. As a human, yes, the human race. EEIK, I was about to say Eek, which I don't think is actually the name of the person, asked, what do the others want and why? Are they just a virus that was made by the children of the forest, or are they something more mischievous? Them being elf-coded, laughing clashes with them being AI.
I think what they want is pretty clear. I think they would like everything to be like them. working for them or reflecting of them. Why? I think this is I don't think there is a White Walker civilization, really. I don't think there's a city where they go shopping. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think they are something gone horribly wrong that doesn't fit into any other version of a world other than the Long Night. I don't think there's coexistence with the others. I don't say that because I hate them and I want them to die. I just think that's, it's like coexisting with the plague. You just can't do it. So I think the why doesn't come from them. I think it comes partially from Children of the Forest. I do think there were probably, my guess is that humans were involved a little more deliberately than a guy being tied to a tree, because there's so many resentful, Tyrion climbs the fiery ladder and Stannis in the Battle of Blackwater just to be part of their family. I feel like there was something to do with that, with the creation of the others. Some human wanted to get involved to screw another human over, and everything got out of control, like Summerhall. So yeah. I don't think the others' motivation is something they came up with, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's something they just kind of have still.
Yeah, I mean, we've been, and you've done this really well in the parts of the Song of Ice and Fire that the others pop up, and it's when they show up in the narrative, they're still they're very much like the people that we they personify how people are interacting in A Song of Ice and Fire. They're feasting on not literally, but metaphorically feasting on corpses and turning them into their own servants, and how that works almost as a personification of the class structure in Westeros and the aristocracy, and how the aristocracy treats the small folk in Westeros. And so that to me indicates that they retain something human. I don't know if you would call it a culture, if you can call essentially slavery culture. I mean, it seems like the lack thereof of culture, the subjugating human beings, and the
vampires from Fever Dream, for sure. The vampires from Fever Dream, if you haven't read it, the evil ones believe they don't have to have culture, because they're just, whatever the humans make, we can steal it. Why would we ever create our own? I think something is going on with that with the others, and and I know this sounds condescending, but there's a certain extent where you just have to let an explanation for the others go, because they're because, as Jeff was saying, they're a distorted version, an exaggerated version of the rest of the story.
Right.
So they don't quite fit, which is why it's going to be wild when they overrun everything. That's where the shock comes from, I think.
Yeah.
And I think there is still drama in terms of the inspiration for them, but I don't think we're going to get to a point where Jon Snow realizes that the others have a point. I know people have talked about that story element kind of being a thing. I'm no, that is silly.
Action justified.
That's not happening. No, what happens is the Stannis and Shireen thing. The how far do you go in dealing with that threat? That's where the real meat of the conflict is, I think.
And I think the Stannis and Shireen thing is very much in keeping with why the others were created in the first place. It's a desperate act by someone to try and win, right? In the last moment.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point. It's but you're on the other side of it now, but you're doing the same things. George loves that kind of reversal. Yeah.
George has said the Winds Winter, we're going to learn a lot more about the others. We're going to go farther than what we've ever gone before. So I'm very, very curious where all that's going to be leading and what George has in store for us. Because I think it'll be a bit different than what we saw in from seasons 6, 7, and 8 of the show. So, and 4 really, where they went all the way up to the true north, so to speak. So yeah. All right, here's a question just up your alley. Luke, Lord of Lone Leaf, who's one of our patrons, asks, what happens to the Maesters after Euron gets done with the Citadel and the rest of the end game? Do they exist in a similar capacity at the end of the story at all, like they did at the beginning?
That's a good question. So yeah, I think the Archmaesters and that whole crew in the Citadel are doomed as soon as Euron shows up. I imagine a lot of this probably has to do with Sam. Sam's going to be the POV in that area. He's going to survive. He's going to be writing books and telling the histories of what went down. So I could see him, trying to keep the light alive of that kind of a literary and intellectual tradition in Westeros. I would be interested, it's how you keep that tradition alive without the maesters just kind of getting high on their own power, which is what you see happening in Old Town, and maybe having them scattered, maybe itinerant. Maybe we'll get like a Septon Maribolds, but like maesters. Like, you know, you roam around and you go around to people and you help them and you educate them and you make your circuit. Maybe that'll be more prevalent. I mean, it doesn't really help with the whole communication thing. Like, you do need someone kind of on point for that. But I am curious to see what comes of an intellectual and literary tradition in Westeros once you take the infrastructure away. Because, you know, I think as history has developed, we've come to realize that the idea of a Dark Ages is very simplistic, and that there was not this hard line of like everyone knew how to read and then the sun went down and we all lived in caves. And like, you know, that's kind of like the things I was taught as a child, and it's just not true. And there are always people, you know, keeping those traditions alive in various forms. And I wonder if we're going to see a version of that afterwards, because I don't think it's going to be rebuilt. So I do think it's going to have to be people trying to keep the flame alive however they can. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, like there's mention of like hedge wizards and things like that, and like the hedge knights too. I can see like a hedge maester class kind of emerging, people that have had some training as a maester, or you have half maestered Halden from A Dance with Dragons, who has
good
part
point.
of the
Maybe
training.
Halden's a good way of thinking about it, because you do have these outcasts, and George has a romantic thing for. Maybe that's a way of thinking, or like Thoros. Maybe that's a way of thinking about the future of maesters.
Maesters, and I think Septons as well. Maribold is a good way of looking at it too, where you have these roving bands of religious leaders who are instructing the faithful and the flock, or maybe you have something like the old gods, where you don't really need a religious laity or clergy. You just need a belief structure and just a place to pray.
Sure,
that could work as well. I think like what. I tend to like go away from like this whole idea that the end of A Song of Ice and Fire is going to be this revolution in terms of like the political system, in terms of the cultural system, that everyone's going to adapt Western style democracy. Instead, I think it's going to be a change. Westeros will come much like characters do in a story, where they start at one place and they end up at a different place. Change the Campbellian structure of stories. We also see different institutions that think in A Song of Ice and Fire that they'll start at one place, and then by the end of the story they'll be in a separate, different place. So, yeah,
I agree, and that taking in that full sweep and what's been done to you. You know, there's the Jaehaerys line from Fire and Blood. We have work to do, and right. I think that's going to be where it goes. Or like the great ending to The Graduate, where the hero and his best love are riding off into the sunset and they're smiling, and the camera sits on them and their smile fades and they're just sitting there, and they realize, oh, and now we just have to keep living. And I think that's the kind of sentiment, the bittersweet ending that George has talked about, is there are possibilities for a better world, but they're not just gonna happen. You just have to keep, creaking towards them every day. I imagine that's the tone we're probably going to be left with.
I absolutely agree. All right, I'm going to take one more question or so.
Works for me, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for sticking around. It's so much fun chatting with you guys. I miss you all. Happy. Is that the way you're supposed to put it? Missed you all? Some of you all?
Yeah, no, I miss it.
Vacation was fine, but I do
glad
miss
to be here.
Our interactions with you all, and we are glad to be here. All right, let's see here. Trying to pick someone who has not
talking about Jaws and astrology in the chat. My two favorite topics.
Do you believe in astrology?
I don't know enough about it to conclude in either direction or the other. I think I've seen some fascinating things about it. I'm interested in it as a way of, frankly talking to people about their emotions and how they relate to each other. I think, like a lot of things, I'm skeptical of it when it gets used as a brand. And used to sell you something. But I think anything that helps people think critically about their own emotions and how they relate to each other is a good thing, even if the stars aren't actually involved in any way, whatever helps to a certain extent, I guess.
Yeah.
You put the sieve over the grass or with the goat's innards, whatever it is you do to convince yourself not to be a dick. I'm on board with. I'm
right there with you. Anything, religion, astrology, faith, whatever you want to do.
Whatever helps. Gentle the ragged tide of life,
No,
what you got to do.
All right, we'll take another one from Alan V. He's been asking a bunch of really good questions tonight. Yes, last week some people on Reddit, I remember this thread, said that Tywin was smart in not sending help to the wall in A Storm of Swords. I couldn't disagree more. For me, it was stupid and selfish. What's your opinion?
Oh yeah, we're gonna have a fun with this Storm of Swords, because this is the big, I've talked about Stannis Tywin parallels before. But this is the big contrast that Stannis, when he hears that the wall's in trouble, goes, and that Tywin does not. And yeah, I think this is, Tywin is claiming to run the realm.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the job of the realm. If he doesn't defend the North, then I think he's making the North's point for them. Like he's treating them as though they are not his to protect. So why should they be his to protect? Like apparently for Tywin, duty only runs one way.
Right.
It's all towards him, and he doesn't owe anybody anything. Everyone just owes him things. And it's short-sighted also because he says like all of the land beyond the wall cannot support vast numbers. Just he has no idea what's going on up there or about any of those people or what they're going through, and he just has no interest in knowing. And so for me, that really undercuts his whole Tywin as this master administrator reputation. It's just like actually he takes his eye off the ball all the time.
Right. Yeah, you're talking about the Stannis Tywin parallels, and this is a place where they run in opposite parallels, opposite ways.
This is where they fork for sure. Mm-hmm.
Stannis doesn't have any a base of support in the North. He goes there because Davos convinces him that it's the right thing to do, regardless of whether the Northmen are going to support him or not. We've been pretty harsh on Stannis, I want to say. But again, as we've been saying, this is the Clash of Kings where Stannis is at.
He is the villain of this book, guys. We gotta, Sorry, Frank.
Yeah, Frank is gonna lose his
antagonist.
There you go. He's the antagonist of this book, and even though he has his moments here in a Clash of Kings, he enters slightly more heroic tinged ways, the ways we're looking at it. So, I think. When you look at him going to the North, it's just we're going to get really deep into his actual conduct in the North and his fight against the wildlings and things like that. There are obviously ways that George makes it so that Stannis showing up in the North is not him straight being the hero, Stannis of House Baratheon coming to save the day.
Sure.
But he does do a good thing of coming north because he is putting his duty first. He's saying he is trying to make himself worthy of sitting the Iron Throne, as opposed to him putting the Iron Throne first and then duty flowing from that. So
right, he's doing the job instead of just assuming that everything about the job should come to him, which is his previous attitude. Yeah, no, I love what he says to the Night's Watch at the end of A Storm of Swords. He says, "You called, and I came, my lords. Right. So now you must live or die with me. Best get used to that." And yeah, I think there's plenty to say about what he does when he gets up there. But as Sam says, one found Dragonstone and a king who still cared. No one else was coming. And that was, Tywin had, and, Stannis showed up and Stannis has barely any men left. Tywin has this vast army after the Battle of Blackwater, all his connections, all his resources. He could help out the North, fight off Mance Rayder really without breaking a sweat.
Right.
He could send 10,000 men up to defend Castle Black and stop Mance in his tracks, and still have plenty of men around to take care of the Ironborn and whoever else is giving him trouble. He doesn't do it because he likes being spiteful and the Northerners. It's the kind of decision Stannis makes at his worst. And, and George sets it up very directly. It's, Stannis says, "Oh, I remember as a young man, I idolized Tywin Lannister." And that's when he's thinking about burning Edric Storm. And then Davos takes that decision away. So it's just, it's wonderful stuff. You may have noticed, folks, we're getting excited for Storm of Swords.
Yeah, right. We're what are we charting it out? We're at chapter 58, so we've got 11 chapters left, and
we got it right. A few chapters left in the Blackwater, and then, like I said, we run through the other POVs after that. So we're almost a Storm, folks. And it's easy to be contrarian about A Storm of Swords, but it's the most beloved book for a reason. So I can't wait. It's
all sorts of great stuff, and wow, it kicks off with the others showing up finally for the first time in a long, long time, which is going to be a lot of fun. So I think we'll put a cap on it for tonight here. We really appreciate everyone showing up and chatting, and enjoy the lively comment section that's been occurring. I've been watching his comments, just scrolling up and up and up, which is going to be a lot of fun to keep going as we continue onward in our journey through the end of Clash into Storm of Swords and beyond that. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming out tonight, and yeah, again, if you're not subscribed to us on YouTube, subscribe. Hit the alert button. Do all the stuff you're supposed to do. And yes, and it's so much fun. So thank you. And as always, thank you, Emmett, for doing this with me. It's great. Thank you.
Of course. Well, thank you, Jeff, for doing it with me. And thank you, folks, for watching. We'll see you back here next week.
We shall. Take care.